The valley lay bathed in the soft, golden haze of early morning, mist curling over the gentle slopes like ghostly fingers. Towering cliffs framed the horizon, their jagged edges cutting into the sky, a silent testament to time's patient hand. The river that carved its way through the heart of the valley shimmered faintly, reflecting the pale light as it whispered over smooth stones. This was a land untouched, yet alive with motion, birds skimming the surface of the water, deer stepping cautiously through the underbrush, and the occasional flash of fur as a predator slinked in the distance. It was here, in this seemingly serene cradle of nature, that a small tribe had carved out a fragile existence. Their homes, simple structures of wood, stone, and woven reeds, blended into the landscape, almost indistinguishable from the trees and rocks surrounding them. Smoke spiraled lazily from hearth fires, carrying with it the scent of roasting meat and damp earth. Children's laughter echoed briefly across the valley, mingling with the call of distant predators, a reminder that life here was both vibrant and perilous. But beneath the surface of daily routines and pastoral beauty, an undercurrent of tension pulsed quietly. Eyes lingered a little too long, hands grasped possessions a little too tightly, and subtle glances exchanged between tribe members hinted at unspoken rivalries. It was a delicate balance, this coexistence, not just with nature, but with one another. In a place where survival demanded cooperation, the seeds of human emotion were already quietly stirring, invisible, yet potent. Morning light revealed the intricate tapestry of the valley, wildflowers in bloom, moss carpeting the stones, and the distant roar of a waterfall breaking the stillness. Every element seemed to exist in harmony, yet even harmony was fragile. The tribe moved through their routines with practiced ease, gathering roots and berries, checking traps, and tending to the few domesticated animals they had coaxed from the wild. Yet in their eyes, there was a flicker of something more than contentment, curiosity, ambition, and the first whispers of envy that would eventually test the bonds holding them together. The camera of imagination could linger on a hunter pausing by the riverbank, his reflection fractured in the rippling water, a mirror not just of his form, but of the duality within, strength and insecurity, pride and doubt. Nearby, a young woman cradled an infant, watching the river's edge with a cautious smile, unaware of how small actions could ripple through the tightly woven web of relationships. Even the elders, whose wisdom should have been a steady anchor, felt the quiet stirrings of unease, recognizing that the delicate balance of trust and cooperation could be shattered by something as human, as ordinary, as jealousy. Above all, the valley itself remained indifferent. Trees swayed with a slow, inevitable rhythm, rivers flowed, oblivious to the emotions of those who lived beside them, the wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying stories that would never be fully understood. Yet in this tranquil, yet tension-laden setting, the stage was being set for a story as old as humanity itself, a story of desire, envy, and the fragility of social bonds. In the shadows of this valley, the first hints of a quiet storm stirred, unseen but unstoppable, and the tribe, so tightly knit in appearance, was about to face the invisible fractures growing within. The tribe was small, yet each individual carried a presence that shaped the rhythm of life in the valley. Their faces told stories older than the rocks surrounding them, lines etched by the sun, the wind, and countless seasons of survival. Here, every glance, every subtle gesture held meaning. These were not just people, they were the embodiment of history, memory, and unspoken emotion, each one a thread in the intricate tapestry of their collective existence. At the heart of the tribe was its leader, a figure both revered and feared. His gaze was steady, his movements deliberate, each decision carrying the weight of responsibility. Though his age had begun to show, silver streaks in his hair, faint wrinkles tracing the corners of his eyes, there remained a vitality that commanded respect. His authority was not only earned through skill in hunting or strategy, but also through the subtle mastery of understanding human nature, knowing when to speak, and when silence carried more power. Next, there was the hunter, young and sharp, whose reputation for skill in the chase had already begun to inspire envy. Muscles honed through years of practice moved with the grace of a predator, yet his eyes sometimes betrayed a flicker of doubt, a hunger not just for food, but for recognition. Around him, others watched with admiration, but beneath that admiration lurked tension, subtle comparisons and silent competitions that threatened to fray the bonds of camaraderie. The women of the tribe were pillars of resilience and quiet influence. One, a weaver of unparalleled skill, had hands that shaped both objects and hearts, her artistry commanding silent reverence. Another, a nurturer and midwife, carried the weight of life itself, tending to both children and the elderly with care that demanded respect. Their roles, seemingly grounded in routine, were anything but simple. Each decision, each favor granted or withheld, rippled through the social fabric, sometimes unnoticed, sometimes carrying the first sparks of envy. Children, too, played their part in the tribe's dynamic. Their laughter, light and unrestrained, provided a fragile counterpoint to the undercurrents of tension that ran through adult interactions. Yet even their games hinted at budding social hierarchies: who led, who followed, who was admired. In these seemingly innocent moments, the early forms of comparison and rivalry were already taking root, subtle and almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. The elders, those who had survived decades and witnessed the cycles of life and death, offered wisdom that often went unheeded. They understood the patterns of jealousy and desire, recognizing the quiet stirrings of conflict before anyone else did. Their advice, gentle yet firm, carried the weight of experience, a reminder that human emotion, unchecked, could be as dangerous as any predator lurking beyond the valley's edges. Daily life was a delicate choreography. Hunters prepared for the morning chase, while women collected roots, herbs, and water from the river. Children mimicked their elders, learning not only skills but the subtle rules of social behavior, the way to show respect, how to claim admiration, and the silent dangers of envy. Every interaction, however mundane, was layered with meaning, a testament to the tribe's interconnectedness and the fragility of their communal trust. Yet even in this close-knit society, cracks began to show. Small glances lingered a moment too long, a tool was admired rather than borrowed, a smile felt like slight favoritism. These were the seemingly minor acts that, over time, festered into silent grudges. The faces of the tribe, while outwardly serene, carried the invisible tension of subtle rivalries and unspoken desires. Each individual, unaware of how deeply their emotions were entwining, was already part of a narrative that would test loyalty, patience, and love. In observing the tribe, one could see the duality of humanity: cooperation intertwined with competition, affection shadowed by envy, pride tempered by doubt. The valley, beautiful and indifferent, held them together physically, yet the unseen emotional currents threatened to pull them apart. The faces of the tribe, so alive with expression and complexity, were the living proof of a timeless truth: even in the simplest communities, human emotion could ignite both wonder and disaster. Even in the most harmonious communities, desire is a quiet force, invisible, yet insistent. In this small valley, where survival depended on cooperation and shared effort, the human heart carried impulses far more complicated than hunger or fear. Desire manifested in the longing for recognition, the craving for skill, the subtle need to be admired or envied. It began as a flicker, nearly imperceptible, but its presence would shape every interaction in ways the tribe could not yet imagine. The hunter, whose prowess in the chase had earned him respect, felt the stirrings of ambition sharpen into envy. He observed the leader, noting the deference paid to every word, and wondered why his own talents did not carry equal weight. In private moments by the river, he traced the line of his reflection in the water and asked himself whether he was overlooked, underestimated, or merely invisible. This desire for recognition, so human and ordinary, was already planting seeds that could grow into rivalry. Among the women, subtle comparisons played out in shared tasks. One mother, skilled in tending the hearth and the children, noticed the admiration another received for weaving intricate baskets and garments. She smiled, but beneath the smile a pang of longing emerged, a wish to be praised, to feel the same sense of accomplishment reflected in others' eyes. Even these quiet, private desires carried weight, for in a small, interconnected society, emotions rarely remained contained. Children, too, were not immune. Games of skill and strength became arenas of comparison. The swiftest child felt pride, while another, slower or less coordinated, felt the sting of inadequacy. What seemed innocent to the adults, the laughter, the playful mockery, was already a rehearsal for the more complex rivalries to come. Early lessons in jealousy, though subtle, were imprinted on their developing minds, teaching them that value could be measured in attention, prowess, and social favor. The elders observed these stirrings with cautious eyes. They understood that desire, when unchecked, could become corrosive. A glance too lingering, a compliment too lavish, a story retold in the wrong tone, all could serve as sparks to ignite emotions better tempered by experience. The wisdom of age was to recognize that even the smallest envy, if nurtured, could become a force strong enough to disrupt the delicate balance of the tribe. Even the natural world seemed to reflect these human longings. The river, relentless in its flow, mirrored the movement of emotions, carrying away what was momentary and revealing what remained beneath the surface. Predators lurked in the forest, their silent watch a constant reminder that desire, if mismanaged, could have deadly consequences. Nature itself, impartial and observing, seemed to whisper a quiet warning. What humans carried within could be as dangerous as any external threat. Within the tribe, desire intertwined with necessity. The need for food, shelter, and protection could not be separated from the emotional currents that ran beneath daily life. A successful hunt brought pride and recognition. A failed one brought shame and comparison. Skill in crafting tools or clothing became a measure of worth, and admiration, even casual, could ignite envy in those who felt overshadowed. Each act of human effort, however practical, carried an emotional dimension that was invisible but potent. Romantic desire, too, was a subtle but powerful force. Attraction, notice, and favoritism created tension where none was intended. A glance exchanged, a smile given, or a gesture of care could be interpreted in multiple ways, and the meanings assigned often reflected inner insecurities rather than reality. In a community so intertwined, such interpretations carried consequences far beyond the individuals involved, subtly shifting alliances and creating fault lines in relationships that otherwise seemed stable. As the days passed, these small desires accumulated, forming a web of unspoken tension. The hunter's pride, the mother's longing, the children's comparisons, the elder's cautious watch, all threads in a complex tapestry of emotion. None were overt acts of malice, yet together they created an atmosphere charged with anticipation, a quiet energy that hinted at the disruption to come. It is in these moments, often unnoticed, that the seeds of tragedy are planted. Desire, a force as old as humanity itself, can inspire greatness, yet it can also provoke envy and resentment. The tribe, unaware of the silent storm growing within, continued its daily life, collecting, hunting, weaving, and teaching. Yet beneath the surface of routine, subtle comparisons, fleeting jealousy, and private longing were already shaping the future. By evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs and shadows stretched across the valley, the tribe gathered near the hearth. Conversations were light, tasks completed, laughter echoing faintly. But in the quiet corners of the mind, each member carried a private wish, a hidden comparison, a desire unspoken but real. It was invisible, yet it exerted pressure like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward in ways that could not be contained. And in that quiet, meditative moment, the valley itself seemed to hold its breath, as though sensing that the first hints of discord, born from the simplest of human desires, were quietly taking root. The air buzzed with excitement as the tribe gathered in the clearing near the riverbank, the spoils of a successful hunt laid out before them. Smoke from small fires spiraled upward, carrying the rich aroma of roasted meat and fragrant herbs. Laughter mingled with the crackle of flames, and the rhythmic pounding of feet on the earth marked the beginning of a celebration that was as much about survival as it was about unity. This was a time when toil gave way to joy, when tension eased, and the tribe could bask in the fleeting sense of abundance. The hunt had been arduous. Spears had been sharpened, traps checked, and the most skilled hunters had tracked game across the valley's dense forests. Each kill represented not just nourishment, but mastery over nature, a testament to human ingenuity and collaboration. As the tribe arranged the food, there was a sense of pride in every hand that had contributed, every effort that had ensured the community's survival. The shared work and the shared reward reinforced the bonds that made life in the valley possible. Children darted between adults, their eyes wide with wonder at the bounty before them. They laughed as they passed plates of meat, mimicking the gestures of their elders, learning the unspoken rules of cooperation and hierarchy. Even in play, subtle lessons were being taught: who received the first portion, who was called upon to help, who earned praise. It was a microcosm of adult society, a mirror reflecting the complex interplay of admiration and envy that quietly threaded through the community. Amidst the celebration, the hunters were lauded for their skill. Stories of daring pursuits and close calls were recounted with animated gestures, laughter, and exclamations. Yet beneath the surface of admiration, a subtle tension began to stir. Eyes lingered a moment too long on the hands of another who had skillfully split a carcass. A murmur of envy slipped into a casual conversation. In the midst of abundance and joy, the first hints of comparison, a quiet measure of worth, began to emerge. The women, central to the rhythm of the gathering, moved gracefully among the firelight and shadows. They distributed food, attended to the youngest children, and maintained the fires with skillful hands. Their presence commanded respect and admiration, yet subtle gestures revealed glimpses of rivalry. One glanced toward a more admired weaver, one slightly envious pause as another received praise. Even in celebration, the human mind could not fully escape the quiet calculations of comparison, the seeds of desire already taking root amidst laughter and song. Music rose as drums and flutes, simple yet rhythmic, filled the clearing. Voices joined in chants and calls, creating a communal heartbeat that resonated with the pulse of life itself. This was more than entertainment, it was an affirmation of identity, a ritual that reminded the tribe of its shared purpose and history. And yet, as with every human gathering, moments of tension punctuated the joy, a subtle frown, a quiet sigh, a lingering glance that hinted at a silent contest. The duality of celebration and subtle rivalry made the evening rich with complexity, a living tapestry of emotion. Food, fire, and music combined to create a sense of fleeting perfection. The tribe savored the moment, knowing that tomorrow would demand effort and endurance once more. In the golden haze of the setting sun, shadows stretched long across the clearing, wrapping the scene in a cinematic contrast of warmth and encroaching darkness. It was a visual metaphor for the evening itself, moments of light and joy intertwined with the shadows of envy and unspoken rivalry. Amid the festivities, relationships were observed and assessed. Who had contributed most? Who received praise? Who stood in the shadow of admiration without recognition? Even as laughter rang through the clearing, comparisons were made quietly and invisibly beneath the surface of every gesture. The celebration, meant to unite, also reminded each individual of the subtle hierarchies and imbalances within the tribe, highlighting how easily joy could be entwined with tension. As night descended, the fires burned brighter against the darkening sky, flickering in rhythm with the tribe's collective heartbeat. The feast drew to a close, yet the emotional currents stirred beneath the surface remained. In shared glances, quiet smiles, and the subtle gestures of those who had tasted both admiration and envy, the tribe unknowingly laid the groundwork for the conflicts that would follow. The night was full of warmth and laughter, yet shadows of desire and subtle rivalry lingered, threading through the valley like invisible currents, hinting at the storm yet to come. The valley itself remained indifferent to the human drama unfolding within it. The river's gentle murmur, the whispering wind, and the silent trees stood as witnesses, impartial and eternal. In the contrast between human celebration and nature's calm, one could sense both the beauty and fragility of existence. The tribe, united in momentary joy, was simultaneously teetering on the edge of internal tension. It was in these quiet, almost invisible undercurrents that the seeds of future discord, the first subtle fractures born of envy, were planted, waiting for the right moment to grow. The morning after the feast, a subtle change had settled over the tribe. The laughter of the previous night lingered faintly in memory, but beneath it, tension had begun to weave itself into the fabric of daily life. The river flowed as always, indifferent, while the valley's cliffs caught the first rays of dawn. Yet within the small community, the first cracks in unity were forming, almost imperceptibly at first. A glance held a moment too long, a hand lingered over a tool, a word carried unintended weight. The catalyst was minor, almost trivial to an outsider. A young hunter, still basking in the praise of the night's feast, had boasted quietly of his skill in the hunt. His words were meant to inspire, to share knowledge, but another hunter, equally skilled yet less admired, felt a sting of irritation. In that moment, admiration twisted into envy. The spark was small, yet in such a tightly connected community, even a minor fissure could grow, fed by subtle glances, unspoken comparisons, and internalized resentment. The elders noticed the shift immediately. They saw the hunter's tightened jaw, the way his eyes followed the more favored hunter across the clearing, and the slight, almost imperceptible withdrawal in conversation. These were patterns they had witnessed countless times before, the early signs of jealousy beginning to take root. They attempted gentle interventions, questions framed as curiosity, reminders of cooperation, small acts of mediation, but the subtle human need to compare and excel was already asserting itself. Among the women, the first rift appeared in the form of quiet exclusion. One of the weavers, previously admired for her skill, noticed another receiving disproportionate praise for a newly completed garment. She smiled outwardly, but inwardly her mind churned with quiet frustration. The tension was delicate, a thread stretching across the communal fabric, almost invisible yet strong enough to pull at the edges of unity. Subtle gestures, a delayed greeting, a slight frown, a careful avoidance of eye contact, began to speak louder than words. The children, sensitive to adult emotion even in their innocence, began to mirror the unease. Playful competitions for attention or skill became more intense. The slightest victory by one child prompted a pang of envy in another, and games once simple transformed into arenas of comparison. Even in the laughter of youth, the first signs of division could be seen, subtle, yet undeniable. These were the earliest echoes of the social fractures that would soon ripple through the tribe. Tasks that had once been cooperative now carried the weight of silent rivalry. Hunting preparations, food gathering, and tool maintenance were no longer purely communal activities. Each action was measured against what others had done. Who would be first to bring water from the river? Who would carry the heaviest load? Who would be praised for efficiency or skill? These small competitions, natural in any human group, began to take on a sharper edge when mixed with envy and unspoken resentment. The tension escalated further during a communal ritual of gratitude to the valley and its bounty. The ritual, meant to strengthen bonds, instead highlighted differences. The leader, observing contributions, unintentionally emphasized the successes of some while overlooking others. Admiration, distributed unevenly, became a source of quiet irritation. Eyes that should have shone with communal pride now flickered with private discontent. What was meant to unify had instead revealed the fragile nature of social equilibrium. Words, even casual and unintended, became weapons. A compliment given to one hunter sparked a flash of resentment in another. Advice offered to a weaver was interpreted as criticism by her rival. Small misunderstandings, magnified by pride and desire, began to form a lattice of tension, invisible but growing stronger. The tribe, still physically united, was now emotionally fractured in ways that could not be easily mended. The rift was most evident in private spaces. By the river, the young hunter brooded alone, reflecting on the praise his peer had received. In the shadows of the hearth, the weaver's thoughts turned inward, weighing perceived slights and imagining slight injustices. These private moments, while silent, were charged with emotion. In a community so interdependent, what happens in solitude seldom remains contained. The ripples of envy and resentment began to reach outward, touching interactions, decisions, and relationships in subtle, destabilizing ways. Even nature seemed to reflect the shift. The river's gentle murmur now sounded harsher, the wind through the trees, sharper, as if the valley itself recognized the fragile balance of emotion teetering within its inhabitants. While survival required unity, human desire threatened to fracture that unity before the tribe even fully realized what was happening. Every action, every glance, carried weight in ways the members themselves barely understood. By midday, the rift had begun to influence group decisions. Who led the next hunt? Who would repair the shelter? Who would be chosen for certain tasks? Subtle favoritism and avoidance, born of jealousy and pride, began to dictate these choices. Cooperation, once effortless, now required negotiation, compromise, and careful observation, a testament to how quickly human emotion can alter even the most essential communal functions. Even the leader, though experienced and wise, felt the strain. Managing resources, guiding the tribe, and maintaining morale became more complicated as private resentments crept into public behavior. He recognized the patterns, he had seen this before, but experience alone could not erase the subtle, growing fissures. Leadership was tested not by external threats, but by the internal, almost invisible forces of human desire and envy. As evening approached, the first rift was fully established. It was still subtle, like a crack in stone, but it would widen with time if left unchecked. Members of the tribe went to rest, each carrying private reflections, comparisons, and resentments. Conversations were polite but guarded. Smiles were measured. Even acts of kindness, previously spontaneous, were now tinged with unspoken evaluation. The valley, ever silent and eternal, seemed to watch, indifferent, yet witness to the beginning of a human storm that had been quietly building in its midst. In these moments, the story of the tribe became more than survival, it became a narrative of emotion, comparison, and the fragile nature of social bonds. The first rift, born of jealousy and subtle rivalry, was a quiet but unstoppable force, setting the stage for events that would test loyalty, trust, and the very fabric of the tribe's existence. From this small, almost imperceptible fracture, the path toward conflict and heartbreak began to unfold. While the tribe struggled with the first stirrings of jealousy, the valley remained indifferent. Trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, their leaves whispering secrets to no one in particular. The river wound through the landscape, carrying silt and water alike, oblivious to the social tensions playing out along its banks. Predators prowled unseen in the underbrush, their silent vigilance a reminder that the world beyond the tribe's firelight had no concern for human quarrels or rivalries. Nature, eternal and impartial, pressed on in perfect rhythm, unconcerned with envy or desire. The valley had witnessed countless seasons, storms, and cycles of life and death long before the tribe arrived. Mountains stood as sentinels, their jagged peaks etched by wind and water, bearing scars from events that no living creature could recall. The sun rose and set without hesitation, indifferent to the emotions of those below. This backdrop of permanence contrasted sharply with the fragile, flickering bonds of the tribe, highlighting the precariousness of human emotion against the vast, enduring landscape. Weather patterns dictated survival, yet they cared nothing for rivalry. A sudden storm could flood the river, flatten shelters, or drive game away, and it would not discriminate between the admired and the overlooked, the proud and the envious. The tribe's successes or failures were momentary gestures in the larger theater of the natural world. In this way, nature acted as a silent judge, indifferent, yet perfectly impartial, forcing humans to confront their vulnerability. Animals moved with a purpose that was entirely their own. Deer grazed cautiously along the tree line, aware only of immediate threats, while wolves or wild cats stalked the edges of vision, hunting without malice or favor. Their existence depended on instinct and survival, not on emotion or social comparison. Watching them, the tribe could see reflections of both themselves and the stark differences between human desire and the animal instinct to simply endure. The contrast was both humbling and unsettling, a reminder that human jealousy was a uniquely self-inflicted complication. The tribe's labor, hunting, gathering, building shelters, was dictated by the whims of nature, yet the internal friction among them threatened to undermine their efforts. A misstep in the forest, a delayed return to camp, or a poorly maintained trap could carry consequences far beyond the human heart's petty competitions. Here, in this valley, nature demanded efficiency, alertness, and cooperation, yet the tribe's growing internal tensions were already reducing their collective resilience. Even simple pleasures were marked by this indifference. The warmth of a sunbeam, the taste of fresh water, the sight of a bird gliding above, these natural gifts required no recognition, no envy, no comparison. They existed in a state of impartial abundance, accessible to all and appreciated by none unless the mind chose to notice. Yet humans, uniquely self-conscious, could twist these neutral blessings into measures of personal worth. A successful catch, a clever trap, or a well-constructed dwelling became a point of comparison, a subtle metric of status, even as the natural world carried on obliviously. The indifference of the environment was also a teacher, though the tribe did not yet fully comprehend its lessons. A broken branch, a shifting riverbank, a storm cloud gathering on the horizon, all were reminders that survival depended not on envy or pride, but on awareness, skill, and cooperation. Nature would not intervene for the jealous, nor reward the resentful. The valley's impartiality was both cruel and honest, a stark contrast to the tribe's inner turmoil. This awareness, however subconscious, added tension to the emotional rift forming within the tribe. While members quarreled and compared themselves, the world around them continued to function with flawless neutrality. The river did not slow for those who felt slighted, the forest did not shield the weak from predators. Every emotional misstep carried the risk of practical consequences, reminding the tribe that their internal struggles were not harmless, they could endanger life itself. By evening, as shadows stretched across the valley and the wind cooled the air, the tribe settled into their shelters with a heightened awareness of both human tension and natural impartiality. Fires flickered against the darkening landscape, and the soft murmur of the river underscored the eternal rhythms of the valley. The contrast was stark. Human hearts, fragile and vulnerable, were contending with forces entirely indifferent, yet intimately intertwined with their survival. Nature's indifference was not cruel. It simply existed. The valley, with its mountains, rivers, and forests, moved to a rhythm that demanded respect but offered no solace for human jealousy. In this environment, the seeds of desire and envy carried weight beyond emotion. They had the power to disrupt life itself. The tribe's journey, still in its early stages, was unfolding against a backdrop that was both beautiful and unforgiving, a landscape that would neither reward nor punish them for their human failings, yet would always magnify the consequences of them. In the quiet moments before sleep, the tribe felt both comforted and uneasy. The wind through the trees, the distant howl of a predator, the ceaseless flow of the river, all reminded them that life was larger than their petty conflicts. Yet the first rift was already established, and nature's impartiality only amplified its importance. Survival in the valley required harmony, but harmony was fragile, and the indifference of the world around them was a constant, silent pressure on the delicate balance of human hearts. By the time the tribe settled into their routines, the first subtle fractures of envy and rivalry had begun to spread like unseen ripples through the community. The valley, indifferent and eternal, seemed to observe in silence, while the humans themselves carried invisible burdens of comparison and desire. In the quiet corners of their dwellings, whispers began to emerge, words carried carefully, meant to entertain, warn, or influence, yet often doing far more than intended. These whispers, seemingly harmless, became the invisible threads weaving the first strands of tension that could unravel the tribe from within. It began in mundane ways. One hunter remarked on the skill of another during a casual recounting of the previous day's hunt. Another, feeling slighted or overlooked, repeated the observation with a subtle exaggeration, adding a shade of criticism that had not been present in the original account. Each retelling carried a kernel of truth wrapped in interpretation, and soon, half-truths spread like fire through dry grass. What started as a simple story about prowess in the hunt became a tale laden with admiration, envy, and quiet resentment. Women, too, contributed to the network of whispers, often unintentionally. Praise given in private to a weaver or nurturer could be relayed inaccurately, misunderstood, or amplified in tone by another. A compliment meant to acknowledge effort became, in retelling, an implication of favoritism or hierarchy. The subtle art of communication, simple in its intent, was warped by the natural tendency to compare, judge, and speculate. In a small, interconnected society, these distortions carried weight far beyond the words themselves. Even the children played a role in this quiet propagation. Observing adult reactions, they repeated fragments of conversation, sometimes with innocent embellishment, sometimes with misinterpretation. A sentence spoken in jest could take on significance as it passed from one pair of ears to another, fueling rivalry before the adults even realized the shift. In this way, secrecy and gossip became a living, breathing force within the tribe, shaping relationships and altering perceptions of loyalty, skill, and status. The elders, perceptive and cautious, noted the growing network of whispers. They understood that jealousy and resentment were as old as humanity itself, and that the quiet power of rumors could corrode even the strongest bonds. Yet their attempts to intervene were limited by the subtlety of the problem. How do you address a tension no one openly acknowledges? How do you prevent a fracture that begins in the silence between words? Their wisdom offered guidance, but it could not halt the invisible spread of discontent. Private conversations, meant to convey encouragement or advice, became stages for misinterpretation. A subtle suggestion to improve a trap, a recommendation to alter a garment, or a hint at a hunting technique could be perceived as criticism or an assertion of superiority. In such a delicate social structure, even small slights carried disproportionate consequences. The emotional architecture of the tribe, already strained by envy, began to buckle under the weight of invisible, whispered judgments. By midday, the atmosphere had subtly shifted. Smiles were measured, greetings delayed, and laughter carried a tinge of tension. Even shared tasks were punctuated by careful observation. Who received the next assignment? Who was praised for success? Who was silently judged for failure? Every action, every glance, became part of a complex web of interpretation and expectation. The tribe, bound together by necessity, found themselves increasingly divided by invisible lines drawn by whispered words and private thoughts. Trust, fragile by nature, was eroded by the accumulation of secrecy. Members of the tribe began to hesitate in offering assistance, in praising others, or in sharing achievements. The natural inclination toward cooperation was tempered by fear of misinterpretation, by the subtle calculations of social hierarchy, and by the growing awareness of envy in those around them. A community that had relied on collective effort now faced the invisible threat of division, a problem more dangerous than any predator stalking the valley. Even the simplest gestures carried weight. Passing a tool, handing over food, or offering help in a hunt was now filtered through a lens of perception. Was the act genuine, or was it calculated? Was admiration sincere, or was it a strategy to curry favor? In the small social ecosystem of the tribe, these questions became a silent preoccupation, altering behavior, heightening tension, and creating a climate in which trust was increasingly difficult to maintain. The role of secrecy and whispering also highlighted the duality of human emotion. Words carried both connection and division. A compliment could uplift one person while casting doubt in another. A story could entertain, yet simultaneously incite rivalry. This delicate balance, invisible yet potent, made every interaction a potential spark for conflict. It was the quiet, unseen currents, the whispers and half-truths, that threatened to drive the tribe toward its first true fracture. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley, the network of whispers had become an invisible force shaping daily life. Some tribe members sensed the tension without understanding its origin, feeling unease in the pit of the stomach, a flicker of suspicion, or a pang of unspoken resentment. Others actively participated, consciously or unconsciously, in the spreading of stories that amplified rivalry. The social landscape had shifted imperceptibly but irreversibly, and the first rift, previously subtle and almost invisible, was now being fanned into a quiet storm by human curiosity and the compounding power of secrets. Nightfall brought a deceptive calm. Fires flickered in the small dwellings, and the valley itself appeared tranquil, the river murmuring and the wind whispering through trees. Yet beneath this calm, emotions churned like an unseen current. The tribe, unaware of the extent of influence their words had on one another, prepared for sleep with private reflections of perceived slights, small victories, and quiet resentments. The power of whispers and secrets had taken root, and though the valley remained indifferent, human hearts were now quietly entwined in the first stages of a conflict that would shape their destiny. Tension had been simmering for days, imperceptible, yet persistent, until the moment arrived that would ignite it into action. The catalyst was not a storm, nor an attack from predators, nor a sudden failure of the tribe's resources. It was something far simpler and far more human, a minor disagreement over recognition and fairness, magnified by envy and whispers, that spiraled into the first overt conflict. This moment, seemingly small to an outsider, would mark the beginning of a chain of events that would change the tribe forever. The incident began during the morning hunt. Two hunters, both skilled and experienced, vied for leadership over the expedition. One, confident and celebrated, had led previous successful hunts and enjoyed the respect of the majority. The other, quietly talented but less recognized, felt slighted, believing that his contributions had been undervalued. A comment intended to clarify roles, a word about who would scout ahead or who would drive the herd, was taken as a challenge to authority. The air, already heavy with unspoken rivalry, became charged. As they moved through the forest, each action became a subtle display of power. The celebrated hunter took deliberate steps to assert his role, while the overlooked one mirrored and measured, determined to claim respect in ways small and precise. Every glance, every gesture carried meaning beyond the immediate task. Even the animals seemed aware of the heightened tension. Birds startled and flew higher, the rustle of leaves echoed with the tribe's unspoken unease, and prey moved cautiously through the underbrush, sensing the hunter's distracted focus. The disagreement escalated quietly, first through subtle word choice and tone. A question became a challenge, a suggestion became criticism, a warning became a slight. What might have been resolved in a few words became a test of pride, of skill, and of social positioning. The hunter who had felt overlooked now carried resentment beneath the surface, a simmering energy that threatened to spill outward. The leader, experienced but human, recognized the signs too late to prevent the unfolding tension. Back at the camp, the ripple effects were immediate. Observers, the women, the elders, and even the children, sensed the shift. Faces that once smiled easily now bore faint lines of concern. Conversations paused briefly, attention diverted to the subtle clash occurring in the forest. The whispers that had been building for days now had material evidence, and interpretation took on urgency. Each member of the tribe began to take sides, consciously or unconsciously, aligning loyalty with admiration, envy, or suspicion. The catalyst revealed a universal truth about human communities: a single spark, when combined with latent tension, can ignite a fire. The disagreement over leadership and recognition was nothing new in principle, but the accumulation of jealousy, desire for recognition, and subtle whispering made it explosive. It was a demonstration of how ordinary emotions, when amplified in a small interconnected society, can trigger profound consequences. Even simple tasks in the aftermath of the incident became fraught with tension. Food distribution, shelter maintenance, and preparation for future hunts were now viewed through the lens of comparison. Who had earned recognition for past efforts? Who was being praised unfairly? Who would now gain advantage in subtle ways? These questions, previously irrelevant in routine cooperation, became central to daily decisions, creating a chain reaction that threatened cohesion. The elders attempted to mediate, using experience and authority to restore equilibrium. They reminded the hunters of shared goals, the importance of cooperation, and the dangers of letting personal pride dictate action. Yet their words, though wise, had limited effect. The catalyst had already reshaped the emotional landscape, and once the seed of overt conflict had been planted, it was difficult to contain. The elders' cautionary advice served more as a subtle reminder of stakes than a barrier to the unfolding drama. Romantic and social dynamics within the tribe also became entangled in the catalyst. Women who had previously shared neutral admiration for the hunters now perceived subtle favoritism. Relationships that had been harmonious became tentative, each gesture scrutinized for hidden meaning. Even children, sensitive to adult emotion, mirrored the discord in their play, competing for attention and reflecting the fractured social hierarchy. In this way, a single spark, an argument in the forest, reverberated through the entire community, affecting every level of social interaction. The natural world, as always, remained indifferent to the unfolding drama. The river flowed past the hunting grounds, carrying fish and silt alike, unconcerned with human pride. Predators moved stealthily in the forest, entirely unaware of the conflict that consumed human attention. The valley, eternal and impartial, provided both beauty and danger without favor or judgment. Yet it magnified the consequences of human emotion, offering no protection against the internal fires ignited by envy, desire, and competition. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the consequences of the catalyst became undeniable. The first visible signs of fracture were evident in gestures, tone, and alignment. Cooperation, previously instinctive, now required careful negotiation and observation. Loyalty was measured, trust questioned, and every decision carried implicit stakes. The catalyst had not only sparked immediate conflict but had also accelerated the growth of underlying tensions, transforming subtle envy and whispers into observable division. Nightfall brought a tense quiet. Fires flickered against the darkening backdrop of the valley, and the tribe gathered under the stars, each member carrying private reflections of the day's events. Conversations were clipped, laughter tentative, and eyes carried the weight of both admiration and jealousy. The incident that might have seemed minor, an argument over recognition, had become a turning point, demonstrating the fragility of social bonds when human desire, envy, and pride intersected. By the end of the day, the catalyst had irrevocably altered the social landscape. What began as latent tension now had a concrete source, a spark that illuminated hidden rivalries and set the stage for escalating conflict. The valley, timeless and indifferent, remained unchanged. Yet within its heart, the tribe was now navigating an invisible battlefield of emotion, trust, and power. This moment, subtle yet profound, would echo through the days that followed, shaping decisions, alliances, and fractures that could ultimately determine the tribe's survival. The catalyst of the previous day had set the stage for divisions that were now impossible to ignore. The tribe, once unified in shared purpose and mutual reliance, began to fracture along invisible lines of loyalty and envy. What had started as subtle rivalry and quiet whispers had evolved into a more tangible separation of hearts and minds. Members no longer acted solely as a collective. Instead, alliances began to form, sometimes consciously, sometimes instinctively, shaped by admiration, fear, or resentment. The hunters were the first to reveal the fractures. One group remained loyal to the recognized leader, following his strategies, echoing his decisions, and supporting his claims to authority. Another group, quietly resentful and emboldened by recent slights, began to assert itself in subtle ways. They mimicked, countered, and occasionally challenged instructions. Cooperation, previously seamless, now required observation and negotiation. The harmony of the hunt, a ritual that had once defined the tribe's cohesion, was now tainted with tension and unspoken calculations. Among the women, loyalties split along both practical and emotional lines. Some supported the favored hunter and his allies, admiring his prowess and recognizing the benefits of alignment. Others, sympathetic to the overlooked hunter or quietly resentful of perceived favoritism, aligned differently. Tasks such as weaving, tending the fire, and caring for children became subtle arenas of competition. Praise was selectively offered, attention carefully measured, and small acts of kindness weighed for implication. Even routine labor became a reflection of allegiance and rivalry. Children, observant and sensitive, mirrored the divisions of their elders. Play became competitive, laughter tinged with rivalry, and games evolved into exercises in comparison. The lessons of envy and loyalty were being reinforced at an early age, embedding patterns of social alignment that would influence the tribe's culture for years to come. Innocent as they seemed, these behaviors were part of the same emotional current that now divided adults, evidence of how quickly human communities internalize conflict. Whispers and secrets, which had already begun to shape perception, now served as tools for influence. Stories of past slights, perceived favoritism, and minor grievances were repeated selectively, amplified, and given new context. A compliment mentioned in passing could be reframed as subtle manipulation. A story of hunting success could be interpreted as boasting or intimidation. These narratives created invisible factions, each supported by belief, resentment, or desire for recognition. Loyalty became conditional, fragile and increasingly difficult to navigate. Even the elders, though experienced and wise, struggled to manage the emerging divisions. Their attempts to mediate were met with subtle resistance or interpreted through the lens of alignment. Neutral counsel was often ignored or misunderstood. Advice offered to one side was perceived as partial. Their authority, once unchallenged, now required constant reinforcement as the subtle balance of influence shifted unpredictably with every interaction. The human heart, they observed, could override even the strongest guidance when pride and envy were involved. The rift began to influence practical decisions in unexpected ways. Who was allowed to hunt with whom? Who shared shelter or fire space? Who received aid during tasks, and who was left to struggle? These decisions, once matters of convenience or necessity, became statements of loyalty, a demonstration of alignment in the social hierarchy now emerging. Cooperation, survival, and trust were no longer automatic. They required conscious effort, calculation, and sometimes compromise. Romantic and familial bonds, too, were affected. Affection, previously freely given, was now measured against perceived loyalty and favoritism. Relationships shifted subtly but unmistakably as individuals aligned themselves with those whose success or recognition reflected positively on them. Even minor gestures, a shared meal, a helping hand, or a smile, became charged with significance. The emotional landscape of the tribe was no longer one of unity but a web of conditional allegiance, tenuous and fraught with potential conflict. The natural world remained indifferent, its rhythms and dangers unchanged. Yet the consequences of splintered loyalty became visible in survival tasks. Hunting parties, divided by allegiance, missed opportunities or made errors, small mistakes magnified by the lack of seamless cooperation. Shelter repairs were delayed, resources unevenly distributed, and shared labor disrupted by mistrust. Nature, impartial and constant, offered no mercy for these human failings. The valley demanded efficiency and vigilance, and divided hearts made mistakes that could have lasting consequences. By dusk, the fractures were clear. Small groups gathered separately around fires, conversations punctuated by laughter that felt wary, glances that measured, and silences that spoke louder than words. The energy of the tribe, once unified and cooperative, was now a series of overlapping currents of loyalty, envy, and self-interest. The social bonds that had sustained them through seasons of hardship were strained to their limits. The valley itself, eternal and observing, seemed to underscore the fragility of human cohesion in contrast to its own enduring stability. The first signs of overt confrontation began to emerge. Minor disputes, previously contained, now drew attention and subtle support from aligned factions. Conflicts over food, hunting strategies, and leadership responsibilities became arenas for testing loyalty and asserting influence. Even in moments meant for reflection or rest, the shadow of division lingered, shaping perception, guiding action, and subtly undermining the trust upon which communal survival depended. Nightfall brought a quiet tension that was impossible to ignore. Fires flickered against the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist like the relationships within the tribe. Individuals withdrew to their chosen companions or solitary reflection, wary of whom to trust, whom to support, and whom to avoid. The social map of the tribe had been irrevocably altered by splintered loyalties, a complex web that would influence every decision, every alliance, and every moment of cooperation in the days to come. In these early stages, the tribe had begun to understand, intuitively but painfully, the power of division. Loyalty, once implicit and easily given, was now conditional, measured, and fraught with consequence. The social fabric so critical to survival was fraying, and the valley, indifferent and eternal, offered no guidance, no intervention, only the constant challenge of life and survival. The rift was no longer invisible, it had taken form, defining relationships, shaping actions, and setting the stage for the conflicts that would follow. The simmering tension that had taken root over days finally reached a critical point. What had been subtle envy, quiet whispers, and fractured loyalties now coalesced into an unmistakable spark, an event that would expose the depth of division within the tribe. It began with a dispute over resources, a seemingly ordinary conflict that escalated rapidly because it intersected with every hidden grudge, unspoken rivalry, and desire for recognition that had accumulated in the hearts of the tribe members. The trigger was a supply of meat from a recent hunt, carefully portioned for fairness but scrutinized through the lens of envy. One hunter, feeling that his contribution had been undervalued, claimed a larger share. Another, already aligned with the established leader, refused, citing tradition and fairness. Words were exchanged, each layered with accusation and justification, and the casual rhythm of the camp dissolved into tension. Eyes darted, fists clenched subtly, and the air itself seemed heavier as the conflict escalated. This spark revealed the fragile nature of trust within the community. Those previously aligned with one faction now faced the choice of defending fairness, siding with loyalty, or remaining neutral. The tribe's cohesion, once implicit and unquestioned, now required conscious decisions under pressure. Every action, glance, and tone carried meaning. A refusal to act could be interpreted as betrayal, and an act of support could be interpreted as opportunism. The social landscape, already complex, became a battlefield of perception and emotion. Women, central to the maintenance of the camp and the distribution of resources, found themselves caught in the storm. One weaver, attempting to mediate, was accused, silently, through glances and whispers, of favoritism. Another, aligned with the overlooked hunter, offered support, subtly challenging the authority of the recognized leader. These minor interventions, seemingly insignificant, carried enormous weight, amplifying the spark into a full flare of tension. Even the smallest gesture, a hand placed on a shoulder, a nod, a frown, became symbolic, laden with allegiance, defiance, or envy. Children, as ever attuned to adult emotion, reflected the turmoil in play. Competitive games became arenas for demonstrating alignment or challenging authority, mimicking the conflicts of their elders. Innocence was tinged with imitation, laughter now carried undertones of rivalry, and cooperation was measured against the prevailing social alignments. In their way, even the youngest members of the tribe participated in the amplification of the spark, reinforcing divisions that had been quietly festering. The elders, sensing the escalation, attempted intervention, speaking with measured tone and deliberate authority. They reminded the tribe of shared history, the importance of cooperation, and the dangers of letting pride dictate actions. Yet the spark had ignited a series of reactions too potent to be quelled by words alone. Resentment, already nurtured in whispers and subtle slights, found expression in confrontation. The elders' wisdom, though respected, was no longer sufficient to prevent the widening rift. The natural world, as always, bore no witness to human drama. The river flowed undisturbed, the wind rustled the trees, and distant predators moved with instinctual precision. Yet the valley's impartiality only magnified the stakes of human error. The tribe, now distracted and divided, risked practical consequences, mismanaged hunting, misallocated resources, and weakened defenses. Nature did not intervene, and yet it tested the community's cohesion with perfect impartiality. Survival required unity, and the spark threatened to undo it. The spark quickly escalated into visible conflict. Voices raised for the first time in anger, accusations flew, and physical gestures of frustration punctuated heated words. The subtle undercurrents of envy and whispered manipulation became tangible, expressed openly for all to see. Factions solidified in real time, alliances cemented by shared grievances, and the tribe's social fabric strained under the sudden weight of open tension. What had been latent for days now demanded attention, recognition, and action. This eruption revealed the consequences of hidden emotions left unchecked. Small slights, whispers, and perceived injustices had combined to create a flashpoint. The tribe, previously unaware of the depth of underlying rivalry, was forced to confront it directly. Decisions had to be made: who would assert authority, who would defend perceived honor, and who would risk alienation by remaining neutral. Each choice carried immediate and lasting consequences, demonstrating how a single spark can illuminate and intensify a network of human emotion and desire. The energy of the camp shifted dramatically. Even shared tasks, once routine, became charged with tension. Hunting parties were carefully observed for signs of alignment, food distribution became a test of fairness and loyalty, and conversations carried a cautious weight. Every member of the tribe was now, consciously or unconsciously, positioning themselves, reacting to the spark in ways that would define the social order for days, weeks, or even longer. Night fell over the valley, and the first flames of overt division burned brightly. Fires flickered in the dwellings, casting long, moving shadows that mirrored the fractures among the tribe members. Silence alternated with heated discussion, observation with confrontation, and cooperation with hesitation. The spark, though small in its origin, had ignited a broader, visible flame of discord, reshaping the emotional and social landscape of the community. The valley itself remained unchanged. Mountains, rivers, and forests continued their eternal rhythm, oblivious to the human drama. Yet the tribe, bound to each other and to the land, felt the consequences keenly. The spark had transformed the invisible tensions of envy, loyalty, and rivalry into palpable conflict, revealing the fragility of cohesion in the face of human emotion. Survival, once a shared and instinctive effort, now depended on navigating an increasingly complex web of alliances, mistrust, and subtle power struggles. By the end of the day, the spark had done more than illuminate divisions, it had set a course for escalation. The tribe had crossed a threshold, moving from subtle envy and whispered discontent to open confrontation and social realignment. Trust was weakened, alliances strengthened, and the delicate balance of cooperation was now under constant threat. The spark had ignited, and the flame it created would shape the destiny of the tribe, leaving no heart untouched and no action free from consequence. The spark of open conflict had illuminated hidden rivalries, and now the first act of betrayal emerged, marking a point of no return. What had been subtle envy, whispers, and divided loyalties now crystallized into deliberate action against one's own tribe. The betrayal was not born of malice alone, but of a complex mixture of fear, desire, pride, and self-preservation. It was a moment that would echo through the valley, changing relationships and reshaping the social fabric of the tribe forever. It began in the quiet hours before dawn. The tribe had divided into factions along the lines of loyalty and resentment established over days of simmering tension. One hunter, previously admired for his skill and restraint, quietly aligned himself with the faction opposing the recognized leader. His motives were complicated: frustration at perceived neglect, envy at the praise lavished on others, and a desire to secure his own position. In that moment, he acted not out of hatred, but from a deeply human impulse to claim acknowledgement and influence within the tribe. The act itself was subtle, yet devastating. During preparations for the morning hunt, this hunter deliberately misdirected the group. He suggested a route to the game that appeared safe but was actually less productive, ensuring that another faction would struggle to succeed. Though no physical harm occurred, the betrayal undermined the trust of those who followed him, weakening cooperation and sowing doubt. This was the first tangible evidence that internal fractures could now manifest in action, not just thought. As the day unfolded, the consequences became clear. The hunt, which had once been a display of collective skill and coordination, faltered. Success was uneven, tasks were incomplete, and frustration grew among those who had trusted the misdirected plan. Whispers and accusations began almost immediately. Some attributed the failure to incompetence, others to deliberate sabotage. The first act of betrayal had introduced uncertainty into the tribe's operations, forcing members to question motives, alliances, and loyalty in ways they had never done before. The women of the tribe, aware of the divisions and the subtle sabotage, reacted in different ways. Some attempted to mediate, offering guidance and trying to restore cohesion. Others, however, aligned themselves with the betrayer, either out of admiration, shared resentment, or calculated self-interest. Tasks such as water collection, fire tending, and preparation of food became arenas where loyalty and suspicion collided. Simple gestures, who helped whom, who received priority for resources, were now interpreted as declarations of allegiance. Children, sensitive to the growing tension, mirrored the fracture in play and routine. Games that had once fostered cooperation now emphasized competition, hierarchy, and alignment with adult factions. Alliances and rivalries in youth reflected the adults' choices, reinforcing patterns of mistrust and division. Innocent as their actions seemed, they were now participants in the evolving social dynamics of betrayal, absorbing lessons in envy, alignment, and the consequences of fractured loyalty. The elders, confronted with the reality of active betrayal, struggled to maintain authority. Their words, once sufficient to guide behavior, were now weighed against factional alliances and suspicions. Efforts to mediate were met with resistance or interpreted as favoring one side. The subtle strategies that had once maintained cohesion were now inadequate in the face of deliberate action that undermined trust and cooperation. The betrayal revealed the limits of experience and wisdom when confronted with human desire and envy. Even nature, impartial and eternal, bore silent witness. The river flowed past the hunting grounds, indifferent to human misdirection. the wind rustled the trees without pause, and predators continued their routines unaffected. Yet the consequences of betrayal were amplified precisely because nature remained impartial. Mistakes in hunting, mismanagement of resources, or weakened cooperation had real survival implications, and the valley offered no reprieve. Survival depended on trust, and betrayal had eroded the foundation of that trust. The ripple effects of the first betrayal extended beyond the immediate task at hand. Social interactions became tense, measured, and cautious. Glances, gestures, and tones were scrutinized for signs of alignment or duplicity. Conversations were carefully structured, with silence carrying equal weight to words. Trust, once implicit, was now a conditional commodity, and every choice became a test of loyalty and perception. The tribe's daily rhythm, from hunting to domestic labor, was now overshadowed by the potential for further treachery. Romantic and familial bonds were strained as well. Those who had previously trusted one another began to question motives and intentions. Simple acts of affection, a shared meal, a helping hand, or a gentle word, were now interpreted through the lens of loyalty or opportunism. Relationships that had been harmonious were tested, revealing how betrayal, even in a single act, could ripple through the entire community, influencing every interaction and decision. The day's events culminated in a quiet moment of reflection around the evening fires. Members of the tribe sat in contemplation, aware of the betrayal but unsure of how to respond. The tension was palpable, the silence heavy with unspoken questions. Who could be trusted, who might act against the collective good, and how could the tribe survive the growing fracture? Even in their solitude, the weight of human desire, envy, and ambition pressed upon every heart, reminding them that cohesion was no longer guaranteed. By nightfall, the first betrayal had irrevocably altered the social landscape. Trust was weakened, alliances were tested, and the delicate balance of cooperation, the foundation of survival, was now unstable. The tribe, which had once functioned as a harmonious unit, now navigated a complex web of suspicion, resentment, and conditional loyalty. Every action, gesture, and word carried amplified significance, and the consequences of one individual's choice had transformed the emotional and operational dynamics of the entire community. The betrayal also illuminated a harsh truth: human desire, pride, and envy are forces as potent and enduring as any natural threat. While predators, storms, and the indifferent river demanded attention and respect, it was the unseen fractures of the heart that now posed the greatest danger. The valley, eternal and observing, offered no judgment, only the impartial backdrop against which human choices played out with lasting consequence. In this crucible of tension, the tribe had entered a new stage of its social evolution. The first betrayal, subtle yet significant, demonstrated the power of individual action to disrupt collective harmony. It revealed the fragility of trust, the complexity of loyalty, and the consequences of envy left unchecked. From this moment onward, every choice, every interaction, and every alignment would carry weight, shaping not only survival but the moral and emotional fabric of the tribe itself. The first betrayal was not violent, nor catastrophic in immediate physical terms, but its impact was profound. It signaled the emergence of a new reality, one in which human emotion, pride, envy, and ambition, could rival the forces of nature in shaping the tribe's destiny. It was a turning point, the moment when internal fracture became visible, undeniable, and consequential. The valley remained silent, yet the hearts of the tribe members were now irrevocably changed, aware that unity could no longer be assumed, and that every act carried risk, consequence, and moral weight. The first betrayal had shifted the social dynamics of the tribe, and now it began to manifest in tangible, dangerous ways. The morning hunt, once a demonstration of skill and cooperation, now carried the weight of fractured trust. Hunters moved with caution, observing one another closely, aware that any misstep could be interpreted as disloyalty or sabotage. The subtle fractures of envy, jealousy, and divided loyalties now bore real consequences, and the valley itself seemed to amplify the stakes. The hunting party, divided by faction and suspicion, faced the wild with less cohesion than before. Normally, the tribe moved as a single organism, anticipating one another's actions, covering blind spots, and maximizing efficiency. Now, hesitation replaced instinct, second-guessing replaced confidence. A hunter paused too long, uncertain whether his partner would cover him. Another moved too hastily, risking detection by prey. These small deviations, imperceptible alone, compounded into serious consequences in the delicate dance of survival. Predators, sensing distraction and disarray, became a more immediate threat. Wolves and large cats, normally avoided through coordinated movement, now approached closer, drawn by the faltering rhythm of the hunters. One hunter, alert but suspicious of his companions, noticed a subtle movement in the underbrush. The warning came too late for a deer to escape unscathed, and the hunter's misjudgment triggered a minor scramble that sent the herd scattering prematurely. The efficiency of the hunt was compromised, revealing the first practical cost of social division. The overlooked hunter who had aligned with a faction against the leader subtly exploited the tension to assert influence. His actions, though not overtly malicious, demonstrated the dangerous intersection of ambition and fractured loyalty. By redirecting the group or delaying coordination, he tested both the patience and the trust of others. Each misstep was magnified by suspicion, creating an environment in which instinct alone could no longer guarantee success. The delicate balance of life, maintained for generations through cooperation and shared experience, was now vulnerable to human emotion. Women, tasked with preparing food and assisting with the hunt when necessary, observed the unfolding chaos with growing concern. Their subtle interventions, handing over tools, suggesting routes, or offering guidance, were scrutinized for alignment and bias. Even the simplest act of assistance could be misinterpreted, leading to further tension. The web of whispers, loyalties, and envy had now spilled into practical survival tasks, demonstrating that the social fracture had consequences far beyond emotion or pride. Children, often shadowing adults or observing from safe distances, reflected the growing danger in their cautious behavior. Games once used to practice coordination or mimic hunting now incorporated elements of mistrust and rivalry. Even in play, they were learning that the consequences of envy and broken trust could be immediate and tangible. The patterns of alignment and division were now being reinforced across generations, illustrating the deep-rooted nature of human emotion and its influence on survival strategies. The elders, sensing the escalation, attempted to intervene once more. Their advice was careful and deliberate, emphasizing observation, patience, and unity. Yet the complex interplay of jealousy, ambition, and alignment made mediation increasingly difficult. Words of wisdom competed against instinct, pride, and resentment, and even the most respected voices struggled to redirect the hunters toward coordinated action. The first tangible cost of betrayal had already shifted the tribe's reliance from instinctual cooperation to conscious management of social dynamics. The natural environment, as ever, remained impartial. Rivers continued to flow, the wind continued to stir the trees, and predators moved according to their own needs. Yet the consequences of the tribe's internal division were amplified by nature's indifference. The valley demanded precision, awareness, and cohesion. Mistakes were no longer minor. Hesitation, misalignment, and distrust increased the risk of injury, wasted effort, and failed hunts. Survival, always precarious, became even more tenuous under the weight of human emotion. The hunters faced a moment of crisis when a predator approached unexpectedly. Normally, coordinated vigilance would have allowed for avoidance or deterrence. Now, hesitation and mistrust caused confusion. One faction held back, unsure if their partner would act. Another moved too aggressively, alerting both prey and predator. The encounter, though ultimately survived without injury, demonstrated the practical dangers of fractured loyalty and the tangible consequences of jealousy and rivalry. Survival relied not only on skill but on trust, and trust had begun to erode. Food, the fundamental reward of the hunt, became a source of further conflict. Portions were distributed according to proximity, perceived effort, or subtle favoritism. The previously neutral act of sharing sustenance was now laden with implication. Who had earned recognition? Who had sabotaged? Who aligned with whom? Each decision carried social weight, reinforcing alliances and resentments alike. The valley, vast and indifferent, observed silently, offering no intervention, no reprieve, and no guidance for the human hearts navigating its challenges. By midday, the consequences of the social fracture were undeniable. The hunt, intended to secure both food and social cohesion, now highlighted the fragility of the tribe's unity. Successes were overshadowed by hesitation, errors magnified by suspicion, and achievements questioned or claimed selectively. The practical, material needs of the tribe were now inextricably linked with the emotional and social consequences of jealousy and betrayal. The valley demanded survival, yet human conflict compromised the most basic aspects of life. Even mundane tasks such as tracking and trapping became exercises in negotiation, vigilance, and subtle strategy. Hunters monitored one another as much as the environment, assessing alignment, testing loyalty, and guarding against sabotage. Every movement was calculated, every gesture scrutinized. Cooperation was no longer instinctual. It required conscious management of human relationships. The fracture that began as whispers and envy now threatened not only social harmony but the very survival of the tribe in a landscape that would not forgive error. As evening approached, the first tangible cost of fractured loyalty was evident. The hunt had produced less food than expected, energy had been wasted, and confidence had eroded. The tribe returned to the camp, aware of both the practical failure and the social undercurrent that had caused it. Conversations were cautious, glances wary, and trust limited. Even in moments of rest, the repercussions of envy and betrayal continued to shape decisions, alliances, and interactions. Nightfall brought no relief. Fires flickered against the shadowed landscape, and the tribe reflected on the day's challenges. The hunt had been a test, revealing not only skill and resilience but also the fragile emotional architecture underpinning survival. Members recognized, consciously or subconsciously, that jealousy and betrayal had tangible consequences. The valley, eternal and indifferent, continued its rhythms, offering beauty and danger without intervention, while the tribe confronted the very real cost of its social fractures. The hunt, once a symbol of coordination, prowess, and unity, had become a warning. Human emotion, unchecked and compounded, now intersected with practical survival in dangerous and unavoidable ways. The tribe learned that envy, pride, and fractured loyalty were not abstract concepts but forces that could imperil life itself. The valley remained indifferent, yet the consequences of human choice were immediate, tangible, and irreversible. By the end of the day, the tribe's awareness had shifted. The practical consequences of envy, whispers, and betrayal were no longer theoretical. Survival required more than skill and instinct. It required careful navigation of fractured social dynamics, strategic cooperation, and constant vigilance. The hunt had turned dangerous not only because of predators and the environment, but because the human heart had become both ally and adversary in the struggle to endure. The aftermath of the dangerous hunt left the tribe raw, tense, and simmering with unspoken judgment. Mistakes had been made, trust had been broken, and survival, always a communal effort, was now threatened by human emotion. It was in this climate that accusations began to fly, sharp and cutting, revealing the full depth of jealousy, envy, and resentment that had been building beneath the surface. Words once measured and deliberate now became weapons, and the fragile fabric of social cohesion was stretched to its breaking point. The first accusations were almost imperceptible. A glance here, a tone there, a carefully chosen word in conversation, all carried implicit blame. Whispers grew louder in private corners of the camp, amplified by interpretation and emotion. Stories of perceived missteps during the hunt were repeated with embellishment, and each retelling shifted loyalty, stoked resentment, and fanned the flames of division. A gesture of kindness could be reframed as manipulation, and a subtle failure as deliberate sabotage. The tribe's social environment, already fractured, became a pressure cooker of emotion and suspicion. The hunters, already divided by loyalty and rivalry, now faced open questioning of their motives. Who had caused the herd to scatter? Who had failed to track efficiently? Who had misdirected the group? Each question carried a hidden charge of judgment, and answers were scrutinized for sincerity, tone, and alignment. The physical and social consequences of the hunt's failure now collided, leaving members vulnerable to both external pressure from nature and internal pressure from one another. Women of the tribe, traditionally the mediators and stabilizers, now found themselves caught in the crossfire of accusation. Attempts to clarify intentions or maintain neutrality were often misinterpreted, adding fuel to existing tensions. Even mundane tasks, tending fires, preparing food, or organizing shelter, became arenas for social signaling. A glance or a word could betray loyalty, align with one faction, or provoke the ire of another. Trust, fragile from the outset, was being tested at every level of interaction. Children, ever observant, absorbed these dynamics with remarkable sensitivity. Play became a stage for reflecting adult conflicts. Games previously rooted in cooperation now emphasized competition, hierarchy, and alliance formation. The lessons learned in these small, seemingly innocent interactions reinforced the patterns of jealousy and mistrust that were now threatening survival. Even in their innocence, the youngest members of the tribe mirrored the fractures of their elders, internalizing the social lessons of accusation, blame, and division. Accusations escalated when the overlooked hunter, emboldened by prior success in subtly undermining the group, began to voice open criticism. His words were sharp, precise, and calculated, aimed at both undermining the authority of the recognized leader and consolidating his own influence. Each statement challenged competence, questioned intentions, and subtly manipulated perception. Allies of the established leader countered, defending authority, highlighting past successes, and emphasizing the danger of division. The camp became a courtroom of whispered judgment, confrontational glances, and tactical statements, each interaction layered with social strategy. The elders, attempting once again to mediate, spoke with caution and deliberation. They reminded the tribe of shared history, collective dependence, and the dangers of letting emotion dictate action. But their authority, though respected, struggled to overcome the momentum of growing suspicion. Accusations, once subtle, now flowed freely and publicly. The balance of power had shifted. Emotion, envy, and desire for recognition had begun to outweigh experience and wisdom. Even the calmest voices were tested under the strain of collective suspicion. The natural world, indifferent and eternal, remained a stark contrast to the chaos within the tribe. Rivers flowed, predators hunted, and storms brewed according to their own rhythm, unaware of the human drama unfolding. Yet the consequences of accusations were amplified precisely because nature's indifference left no margin for error. Survival required coordination and trust, and as accusations flew unchecked, the risk of mistakes, wasted effort, and physical danger increased. The valley, beautiful and impartial, served as a silent witness to human frailty. Accusations were not only verbal, subtle gestures became equally telling. Who handed tools first, who sat beside whom, who received a portion of meat, these actions were read as signs of allegiance or betrayal. The tribe became hyper-aware of micro-interactions, interpreting intention in everything. A simple glance could ignite suspicion, a pause in conversation could suggest complicity. Every interaction became a test of loyalty, a potential source of blame, and a reminder of the consequences of divided hearts. Romantic and familial bonds were further strained under the weight of accusation. Relationships once defined by trust and shared experience now required constant negotiation. Acts of kindness were scrutinized, loyalty questioned, and small gestures misinterpreted as favoritism or manipulation. The social bonds that had ensured cooperation and survival were now fragile, conditional, and deeply vulnerable to the escalating cycle of blame. By midday, the camp was saturated with tension. Conversations fragmented into clusters of whispered debate, accusations, and counter-accusations. The communal energy that had sustained the tribe in previous hunts, chores, and gatherings now shifted to self-preservation, social positioning, and cautious observation. Each individual was both participant and observer, navigating the delicate balance of loyalty and survival. The flow of energy, once harmonious, was now turbulent, unpredictable, and fraught with danger. The elders attempted to restore order by emphasizing shared goals, protection, food acquisition, and mutual reliance. They reminded the tribe that survival required coordination and that unchecked envy and blame could imperil every member. Yet the current of emotion was strong, accusations had momentum, and the consequences of prior betrayal continued to shape perception. Even well-intentioned guidance could be interpreted as favoritism or interference, further complicating mediation efforts. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the impact of accusations was unmistakable. Social lines, once subtle and flexible, had hardened. Factions were now overt, and alignment was measured in both words and deeds. Trust had become a currency, allocated sparingly and carefully, and every action carried potential consequences. The tribe's emotional and social landscape was fractured, and the valley, with its unchanging beauty and impartial challenge, reminded them that survival demanded more than strength. It demanded unity that now felt elusive. Night brought no relief. Fires flickered against the darkened landscape, casting long, shifting shadows that mirrored the fractures in the tribe. Members gathered cautiously, avoiding contentious topics but unable to escape the lingering tension. The weight of accusation hung heavily in the air, shaping thought, guiding behavior, and influencing even the most mundane actions. Social cohesion, so essential to survival, was under threat from the very hearts and minds that depended on it. The day of flying accusations marked a turning point. It revealed the dangerous power of envy, jealousy, and the human need for recognition. It demonstrated how quickly trust could erode, alliances form and fracture, and simple disagreements evolve into challenges that could imperil survival. The valley remained silent, eternal, and indifferent, yet the consequences of accusation were immediate and real. The tribe had entered a stage in which emotion, perception, and morality intertwined with survival, reshaping every interaction, every decision, and every heartbeat within the community. By the end of the day, the tribe understood that the consequences of human emotion were as tangible and dangerous as any predator or storm. The cycle of envy, betrayal, and accusation was now active, and its momentum would shape the tribe's fate in ways that could not be undone. Every word, gesture, and choice carried amplified weight. The once harmonious rhythm of life had become a tense negotiation, and the tribe, in the valley's impartial gaze, began to confront the fragility of unity under the influence of jealousy. Night fell over the valley, bringing darkness and a silence that amplified every unspoken thought. The day's events, the spark, the betrayal, the hunt's failures, and the relentless accusations, had left the tribe emotionally exhausted, yet unable to find peace. Darkness often offered comfort in times of survival, a moment to rest, reflect, and recharge. But tonight, the shadows were heavy with suspicion, envy, and unresolved conflict. The flickering campfires cast long, distorted shapes on the faces of the tribe, exaggerating tension and deepening the sense of unease. The fractured loyalties that had been evident during the day became sharper and more deliberate in the night. Individuals chose carefully where to sit, who to share warmth with, and who to avoid. Every gesture was measured, every word weighed. The subtle hierarchy of suspicion now guided behavior as much as tradition or experience had in times past. Allies and adversaries alike circled the fires in careful patterns, reflecting the invisible boundaries that had been drawn between factions. The whispers continued in hushed tones, fragments of conversation carried across the camp, testing loyalty and spreading subtle discontent. Stories of perceived slights were retold, facts rearranged, and grievances emphasized. These narratives, amplified by the darkness and silence, took on a weight they had not held in daylight. Even small acts, like offering a tool or passing food, were scrutinized and interpreted for hidden intent. The night became a stage for social navigation, where survival and alliance were intertwined with perception and judgment. The hunters, still reeling from the morning's misdirection, reflected on their mistakes and questioned motives. Trust, previously assumed, had become conditional. Every decision during the hunt, where to track, when to strike, how to cooperate, was replayed in the mind, analyzed for signs of betrayal or incompetence. The night heightened the awareness of vulnerability, both from nature and from one another. Mistakes were no longer just tactical, they carried social consequences that could ripple through the tribe for days or even longer. Women, traditionally the stabilizers of the camp, were equally affected. Tasks that had once been routine, tending fires, preparing bedding, organizing shelter, now carried layers of social meaning. Decisions about proximity, attention, or distribution were interpreted as signs of alignment or bias. Even silent observation was scrutinized. The night's darkness, instead of offering rest, magnified the need to navigate alliances carefully, reinforcing divisions that had already begun to shape the tribe's daily life. Children, attuned to adult emotion, mirrored the tension in their behavior. They clustered near trusted adults, avoiding those whose alignment was uncertain. Play, once a source of learning and cooperation, now reflected caution, hierarchy, and imitation of adult mistrust. The patterns of loyalty, suspicion, and envy were internalized early, becoming part of the next generation's understanding of social dynamics. Even innocence was influenced, revealing how deeply human emotion shapes community cohesion. The elders, aware of the growing tension, attempted to guide the tribe toward reflection and calm. They spoke quietly about shared survival, past challenges, and the importance of unity. Yet their words struggled to penetrate the weight of suspicion and fear. Even calm counsel was filtered through the lens of mistrust, with every suggestion interpreted according to alignment or interest. The night revealed the limits of wisdom when faced with the complexities of jealousy, pride, and emotional fracture. The natural environment, unchanged and impartial, contrasted starkly with the human turmoil. The wind whispered through trees, animals moved silently, and the valley maintained its eternal rhythms. Yet this very indifference intensified human anxiety. The tribe, dependent on both nature and each other for survival, now faced the stark realization that internal division could be as dangerous as predators or harsh terrain. Survival required unity, and unity was now a fragile, conditional concept. Small fires flickered across the camp, casting moving shadows that mirrored the restless emotions of the tribe. Every glance, movement, or whispered word became a test of alignment. Those suspected of betrayal were watched closely, those aligned with favored factions received subtle attention or deferential gestures. Even in moments meant for rest, the social dynamics of suspicion governed behavior, influencing choices of proximity, conversation, and trust. Nightfall had transformed the camp into a web of psychological tension as potent as any physical threat. Conversations were cautious and deliberate. Even sharing food or water became an act laden with potential consequence. Every interaction required navigation of hidden loyalties as well as anticipation of potential responses. The previously natural rhythm of human behavior was replaced with calculation, observation, and subtle maneuvering. Simple human needs, warmth, sustenance, companionship, became entwined with survival, social standing, and the ongoing consequences of envy and rivalry. The tension also influenced thought and emotion. Fear, pride, and self-interest mingled, creating internal conflict in every tribe member. Questions of trust, loyalty, and moral choice weighed heavily on the mind. Should one confront, retreat, or remain silent? How much to give, how much to withhold, and to whom? Even those who had previously been confident and respected were now cautious, aware that any misstep could be interpreted as betrayal or weakness. The psychological stakes of survival had escalated alongside the practical ones. By the middle of the night, the camp was a tableau of vigilance and silent strategy. Members moved quietly, careful not to provoke conflict, but unable to ignore the fractures that had emerged. Rest came in interrupted waves, vigilance tempered by exhaustion. The interplay of human emotion, social alignment, and practical need created a delicate balance, one that could be disrupted at any moment by jealousy, fear, or ambition. Night had revealed how deeply division could penetrate, influencing every thought and action. The first sparks of physical conflict, though subtle, were visible. Small gestures, a shift in seating, a denied request, or a glance, triggered tension. Even the most cautious interactions were charged with the potential for confrontation. The tribe's shared history, traditions, and dependence on one another were now constantly mediated by suspicion and conditional trust. Nightfall had crystallized the social fractures, making them impossible to ignore and setting the stage for the confrontations to come. By dawn, the first signs of exhaustion were apparent. Sleep had been shallow and tentative, dreams were likely haunted by yesterday's betrayals and today's missteps. Yet the day ahead would demand action, coordination, and survival skills that could not be postponed. The night had intensified emotional divides, but it had also allowed reflection, fear, and calculation to coexist, creating a tense, anticipatory pause before the next chapter of conflict. Nightfall tension revealed a universal truth: in the absence of external guidance, human emotion can dominate thought and action, creating danger as tangible as any predator or storm. The valley, indifferent to human drama, provided no intervention, and the tribe was left to navigate both the physical demands of survival and the intricate, perilous landscape of jealousy, loyalty, and fear. The night, while silent, had spoken volumes about the cost of fractured hearts and minds. The tribe emerged from nightfall forever changed. Rest was incomplete, trust fragile, and alliances conditional. Every member understood, consciously or not, that survival depended not only on skill and instinct but also on navigating the treacherous currents of human emotion. The calm of darkness had been a deceptive veneer, beneath which tension, suspicion, and anticipation of conflict had grown. The stage was set, and the tribe, poised on the edge of another day, faced the uncertain consequences of their divided hearts. As the first pale light of dawn stretched across the valley, the tribe stirred with a tension that had solidified overnight. Nightfall had been restless and heavy with suspicion, and now daylight brought exposure, clarity, and the inevitability of confrontation. The fractures of jealousy, betrayal, and resentment could no longer remain hidden in whispers or shadows. Dawn demanded action, decisions, and acknowledgement of grievances that had been simmering beneath the surface. The air was thick with unspoken accusations as the tribe gathered near the central fire. Movements were deliberate and cautious, as if each step could ignite further conflict. Eyes met eyes with a careful intensity, scanning for alignment, loyalty, and threat. Allies subtly reinforced one another with gestures and shared glances, while those suspected of disloyalty were watched closely. The morning light revealed not just faces but the emotional currents that ran beneath them, highlighting fractures invisible in the dim of night. The first words were careful, almost tentative. A leader, aware that the day's survival depended on clarity and cohesion, attempted to reassert authority. He called attention to the importance of cooperation and the need to maintain unity despite the previous day's events. Yet even as he spoke, his words were met with tension, skepticism, and subtle resistance. Some nodded in agreement, some remained silent, and others exchanged glances that suggested dissent. The dialogue itself became a battlefield, with every statement carrying both literal meaning and hidden implication. The overlooked hunter, emboldened by prior missteps and the tribe's ongoing division, seized the moment to challenge authority. His voice, calm yet piercing, questioned prior decisions, subtly undermined achievements, and highlighted perceived inequities in recognition and reward. Every word was calculated to provoke reflection, doubt, and alignment with his perspective. Allies of the established leader responded, defending tradition, emphasizing fairness, and attempting to re-establish social equilibrium. The confrontation, though verbal, carried the weight of prior betrayals and simmering envy, and every participant felt the pulse of potential escalation. Women of the tribe, positioned both as mediators and participants, navigated the tension with care. Some attempted to diffuse anger through subtle interventions, offering conciliatory gestures or reminders of shared survival. Others, however, aligned with one faction or another, reinforcing divisions and increasing the stakes. Tasks such as preparing food, organizing the fire, and tending children became subtle tests of loyalty, observed for alignment and intention. Even ordinary activity was transformed into a stage for negotiation, signaling, and evaluation of trustworthiness. Children, alert to the adult conflict, mirrored the tension in quiet observation or mimicked it in play. Games once simple exercises of coordination and learning now became arenas for competition, alliance, and social signaling. They absorbed lessons in loyalty, jealousy, and strategic alignment from the earliest age. Even in their innocence, they were participants in the unfolding drama, reflecting the emotional currents of the adults and reinforcing patterns of division and mistrust across generations. The natural environment, still impartial and eternal, contrasted sharply with the charged human interaction. Rivers flowed with indifference, the wind rustled the trees without concern, and predators continued their routines. Yet nature's impartiality intensified the stakes. Survival required coordination, skill, and trust. The first confrontation at dawn revealed that the tribe's internal division was no longer an abstract emotional risk, it was now a tangible threat to both life and social stability. The confrontation escalated subtly but decisively. Accusations became more explicit, grievances articulated with clarity, and past betrayals were highlighted as justification for current alignment. Words once carefully measured now carried sharpness, edge, and authority. Gestures previously innocuous became symbolic. A step forward signaled challenge, a hand extended could indicate alliance, and even a glance could provoke suspicion or reassurance. The social battlefield was fully active, with each member navigating risk, loyalty, and ambition simultaneously. The elders intervened, their voices deliberate and measured, attempting to restore reason and perspective. They reminded the tribe of shared history, survival dependence, and the consequences of disunity. Yet their presence was no longer a guarantee of calm. Their authority had been tested, and their words competed with the growing momentum of emotion and strategic alignment. Even the most experienced members were forced to negotiate their influence within a web of jealousy, suspicion, and ambition. Hunting and survival tasks, which had already been strained by previous missteps, now became arenas for further tension. Assignments were scrutinized for fairness, effort, and alignment. A decision about who would lead a scouting group or carry the game was interpreted not just as practical but as a political signal. Every action, from moving a bundle of firewood to distributing water, carried layers of implication, reflecting both the history of envy and the immediate consequences of the confrontation. By mid-morning, the confrontation had reached a critical point. Voices rose, arguments sharpened, and gestures became more pronounced. Individuals aligned with one faction reinforced each other's positions, while opposing members countered with equal force. The valley, beautiful and eternal, bore witness to this human struggle, a confrontation rooted not in external threat but in the subtleties of pride, envy, loyalty, and ambition. The drama was human, social, and deeply consequential. The first hints of physical tension appeared, not in violence, but in proximity, posturing, and subtle gestures. Hands rested lightly on weapons or tools, bodies shifted closer or farther, and movement was calculated for both defense and assertion. The emotional weight of the confrontation had tangible effects on posture, energy, and rhythm. Survival, social standing, and future alignment were all interwoven into the body language of the tribe. The confrontation also tested emotional limits. Fear, anger, pride, and shame intertwined, creating a charged atmosphere that required constant vigilance. Mistakes, hesitation, or misjudgment could provoke escalation or realignment. Every word spoken and action taken had amplified significance, and the tribe collectively felt the precarious balance between survival and social collapse. The first confrontation at dawn was both a revelation of internal fractures and a demonstration of the power of human emotion in shaping collective destiny. By late morning, the confrontation began to stabilize, but only superficially. Words had been exchanged, alignments clarified, and grievances voiced, yet the underlying tension persisted. Trust had been tested, authority challenged, and the subtle fractures of jealousy and envy had been fully exposed. The tribe, now acutely aware of its vulnerabilities, faced the dual challenge of managing both practical survival and the complexities of human emotion. The confrontation at dawn left an indelible mark on the social fabric of the tribe. Alliances had shifted, loyalty had been tested, and the consequences of envy and betrayal had become fully tangible. Every member now understood that unity could no longer be assumed, that vigilance was necessary not only against predators but also against the human heart. Survival, coordination, and social cohesion were now intertwined in a delicate, high-stakes balance. As the sun climbed higher, the tribe moved forward, carrying the lessons of the confrontation. Actions became more deliberate, observations more careful, and alliances more consciously maintained. The first confrontation at dawn had revealed not only the dangers of jealousy and betrayal but also the resilience, adaptability, and strategic thinking required to navigate human emotion under extreme circumstances. The tribe's path forward would be shaped as much by internal dynamics as by the challenges of the natural world. The valley remained indifferent, eternal, and observing, offering no intervention or guidance. Yet within this impartial landscape, the tribe's emotional and social evolution was underway. Dawn had tested their unity, exposed fractures, and clarified loyalties. The confrontation was over, but its consequences were only beginning to ripple through every interaction, every task, and every heartbeat of the community. Survival depended on navigating both the tangible dangers of nature and the invisible yet potent forces of envy, jealousy, and human ambition. By mid-morning, the confrontation at dawn had concluded, but its echoes lingered like a low, persistent hum throughout the tribe. The emotional fractures had solidified into discernible divisions. Alliances were no longer subtle whispers or fleeting glances, they were visible in seating arrangements, gestures, proximity, and even the way members moved through the camp. Lines had been drawn, and the tribe now navigated a terrain that was as much social and psychological as it was physical. The overlooked hunter, emboldened by his success in undermining authority, now occupied a position of influence within his faction. His alignment with certain members, both men and women, created a network of loyalty that was strategic, deliberate, and emotionally charged. Every act, every glance, every minor decision within this faction reinforced cohesion while simultaneously signaling opposition to the other side. This was not merely social preference, it was a demonstration of human strategy, cunning, and the enduring power of jealousy to create tangible divisions. The previously recognized leader, aware that authority had been challenged, consolidated his own alliances. He sought to maintain cohesion among loyal members while carefully monitoring dissenters. Decisions about resource allocation, hunting assignments, and protective duties were now calculated not only for efficiency but also for loyalty and alignment. The subtle art of leadership had shifted from guiding collective survival to balancing emotion, perception, and trust. The valley, eternal and impartial, provided the stage for this delicate negotiation, indifferent to success or failure. Women, mediators turned strategic participants, now occupied critical roles in this division. They maintained ties with both factions, observing, influencing, and occasionally steering interactions to maintain some semblance of stability. Their actions, from distributing food to offering assistance in daily tasks, were interpreted as political as much as practical. Even routine gestures carried the weight of alliance and judgment, reinforcing the lines drawn between groups while highlighting the nuanced strategies required to survive in both the natural and social landscape. Children, acutely aware of adult dynamics, adjusted their behavior accordingly. Play mirrored factional alignment, subtly reinforcing adult alliances and divisions. Those aligned with the dominant faction in games were rewarded with inclusion, while those associated with dissenters were sidelined or challenged. Even at a young age, lessons in social navigation, loyalty, and the consequences of envy were embedded. The fractures of the adult world were thus perpetuated into the next generation, ensuring that the social impact of betrayal and jealousy extended far beyond the immediate moment. The elders, aware of the danger posed by rigidly drawn lines, attempted to restore perspective. They reminded the tribe that survival depended on coordination and mutual reliance, warning that deepening divisions could threaten not only social cohesion but life itself. Yet their words, while respected, were now filtered through the lens of factional allegiance. Neutral guidance was increasingly difficult to deliver in a world where perception, suspicion, and emotional investment dictated interpretation and response. The social landscape had changed fundamentally. Authority required both wisdom and acute emotional intelligence. The valley remained indifferent to human conflict. Rivers continued to flow, predators hunted, and storms approached and receded according to their own rhythm. Nature, impartial and eternal, contrasted sharply with the charged atmosphere of the camp. Yet this very impartiality magnified the stakes of human division. Survival required cooperation, skill, and trust, all of which were now strained under the weight of drawn lines and factional alignment. The external world provided no forgiveness, no pause, and no assistance for fractured hearts. Tasks once routine became exercises in strategic consideration. Assignments for gathering, hunting, and food preparation were influenced by alignment. Who worked with whom, who received resources first, and who was assigned dangerous tasks, all of these practical decisions now carried social significance. Misalignment or perceived favoritism could provoke suspicion, resentment, or outright conflict. The interplay of human emotion and survival was now evident in every interaction, demonstrating that social fractures could directly impact material outcomes and collective well-being. Even simple gestures were loaded with meaning. A glance, a nod, a passing comment, or the sharing of a tool became a coded message about loyalty and alignment. Observation and interpretation were constant, and misreading intention could have consequences both social and practical. The camp, once a unified organism, now functioned as multiple overlapping social networks, each reinforcing its own internal logic while challenging cohesion with the opposing faction. Trust had become a conditional, fragile resource, rationed carefully and constantly evaluated. Romantic and familial bonds were tested as lines hardened. Relationships that had previously functioned on shared history and emotional connection were now subject to scrutiny. Acts of affection, assistance, or attention were interpreted through the lens of factional alignment. Simple decisions, who shared a meal with whom, who offered protection or guidance, became symbolic gestures of loyalty or dissent. The social landscape had become both tactical and deeply emotional, requiring constant navigation to maintain personal and collective survival. By late morning, the consequences of lines drawn were evident in the tribe's movements, decisions, and interactions. Coordination suffered as factions sometimes worked independently or in competition, even when cooperation was essential for hunting, foraging, or defense. Mistakes became amplified due to misalignment, miscommunication, and the mistrust that now permeated even routine tasks. The cost of social fracture was tangible, immediate, and escalating, revealing how deeply human emotion could influence survival outcomes. The first signs of subtle confrontation appeared in daily routines. Tasks that required coordination, such as constructing shelters, preparing fire, or managing water sources, were now opportunities to assert influence, gauge loyalty, or demonstrate competence. Success was interpreted not only as skill but also as validation of alignment, while failure was scrutinized for evidence of sabotage, misjudgment, or factional allegiance. The practical and emotional dimensions of life had become inseparable, each action layered with meaning and consequence. By afternoon, the tribe had settled into a tense equilibrium. The lines drawn were respected, boundaries maintained, and alliances actively reinforced. Yet beneath this surface calm, undercurrents of resentment, envy, and suspicion remained potent. Small provocations, an accidental brush, a misinterpreted word, a delayed action, could escalate quickly. The awareness of these lines and the necessity of navigating them with precision shaped every interaction, every decision, and every perception. Even the natural world seemed to mirror the internal tension. Wind stirred the trees in sudden gusts, shadows shifted unpredictably, and predators watched from a distance, reminding the tribe that survival was not only social but physical. The indifferent valley observed silently, yet its impartial presence highlighted the high stakes of fractured unity. Survival depended on navigating both environmental and emotional challenges simultaneously, a delicate balancing act demanding constant attention. By evening, the full impact of drawn lines was apparent. The tribe's internal cohesion was fragile, its social network partitioned, and trust scarce. Cooperation required deliberate choice, alliances had become strategic rather than instinctual, and even small tasks carried the weight of social consequence. The first betrayal, the hunt's missteps, and the subsequent confrontation had culminated in a new reality. The tribe was divided, its survival dependent not only on skill and resilience but also on the careful navigation of envy, ambition, and loyalty. Night approached, bringing with it both uncertainty and the chance for reflection. The lines drawn during the day had crystallized the tribe's divisions, creating a social landscape as challenging as the physical one they inhabited. Rest, safety, and survival now required more than instinct and cooperation. They demanded awareness, strategy, and emotional intelligence. The tribe had crossed a threshold. Internal fracture was no longer a potential risk but a defining reality of daily life in the valley. The stage was set for further conflict, reflection, and human drama. The lines drawn at dawn and reinforced throughout the day were now tangible, shaping every decision, every relationship, and every heartbeat. Survival, social cohesion, and the balance of power had become inseparably intertwined with the complexities of human emotion. The tribe, ever observed by the impartial valley, now faced the ongoing consequences of envy, jealousy, and strategic alignment in ways that would resonate for generations to come. By the next morning, the fractured tribe began to settle into a tense rhythm, aware that the survival of the group now depended on more than instinct and physical skill. The confrontation at dawn and the lines drawn during the previous day had crystallized alliances, revealing the depth of jealousy, envy, and human ambition. In this fragile equilibrium, a plan began to emerge, a strategy designed not only to address the immediate survival needs of the tribe but also to navigate the treacherous social landscape that had formed in the wake of betrayal. The overlooked hunter, now emboldened by his influence and the loyalty of a significant faction, became the architect of this emerging plan. His approach was deliberate, combining practical strategy with a keen understanding of social dynamics. He recognized that survival in the valley required more than coordinated hunting or shelter construction. It demanded the careful management of trust, perception, and alignment. Each move was designed to strengthen his faction, subtly weaken the opposing side, and ultimately consolidate authority without provoking open conflict. Gathering his closest allies, he outlined the tasks that needed to be accomplished: scouting for game, organizing storage for gathered resources, and fortifying shelter sites against both environmental threats and potential internal sabotage. Yet his instructions were layered with social strategy. Assignments were distributed not purely based on skill, but on loyalty and influence. Those whose allegiance was certain were entrusted with critical responsibilities, while those whose loyalty was questionable were given tasks that tested obedience, alignment, and reliability. Every action taken would send a message about factional power and influence. The established leader, observing the subtle orchestration, responded in kind. Recognizing that passive observation could allow his authority to erode further, he devised countermeasures: strategic allocations of resources, visible demonstrations of competence, and deliberate reinforcement of his loyal followers' positions. He reminded the tribe of shared history, previous successes, and the dangers of division, framing his actions as both protective and authoritative. Every movement, decision, and word was carefully crafted to preserve cohesion within his faction while countering the influence of the rival group. Women within the tribe, balancing roles as nurturers, mediators, and strategists, became critical intermediaries in the formation and execution of plans. Some served as discreet informants, observing behavior across factions and relaying subtle signals. Others managed resources and day-to-day activities in ways that subtly reinforced alliances and hierarchies. Even in seemingly mundane tasks, distributing food, maintaining fire, tending children, these women embedded strategy and social signaling, demonstrating how deeply survival and social navigation were intertwined. Children, ever perceptive, absorbed lessons in alignment, loyalty, and strategy. Play became an exercise in testing boundaries, observing authority, and exploring alliances. Games mirrored adult divisions, reinforcing the emerging structure of factions and the consequences of trust or betrayal. In subtle ways, the next generation learned to navigate the intricate social web that had developed, understanding early that survival depended as much on psychological acumen as physical skill. The plan also considered environmental factors. The valley was alive with both opportunity and threat. Rivers and streams offered water, forests concealed predators, and storms were always a looming possibility. Every decision, from hunting routes to shelter placement, was informed by these realities. Yet the human factor, trust, jealousy, and loyalty, was equally critical. Without careful coordination, even the best-laid plans could falter, leaving the tribe vulnerable to both natural and social hazards. The overlooked hunter understood that effective strategy required harmonizing human dynamics with environmental demands. The day's initial tasks were assigned with precision. Scouts were sent to track game, observers were dispatched to monitor factional behavior, and teams were organized to fortify shelters. These assignments were not merely practical, they were a means of signaling competence, testing loyalty, and reinforcing alignment. Each success would strengthen a faction's position, while each failure, whether deliberate or accidental, could undermine trust and influence. The valley, indifferent and eternal, observed as human ambition and emotion intertwined with survival demands. Communication became critical. Subtle gestures, shared glances, and careful words conveyed allegiance and intention. Instructions were layered with nuance, ensuring that only those aligned with a faction fully understood the plan's scope and significance. Missteps, ambiguity, or hesitation could reveal hidden loyalties or expose weaknesses, making every interaction an opportunity for strategic insight. Even the smallest movement carried weight, and the tribe learned that observation was as important as action. By midday, the initial phases of the plan were underway. Hunting parties moved cautiously, aware that coordination was essential but that trust was fragile. Shelters were reinforced with the factional lines influencing placement and collaboration. Resource distribution was conducted with deliberate attention to signaling, ensuring that both utility and social perception were addressed. The tribe was engaged in a delicate dance, balancing immediate survival with the long-term management of factional influence and control. The elders, recognizing the potential for escalation, sought to influence the plan subtly. They emphasized balance, fairness, and the importance of maintaining cohesion for the sake of survival. Yet even their guidance was filtered through the lens of factional allegiance, with their words interpreted, evaluated, and leveraged strategically. The emerging plan demonstrated how human emotion and social alignment had become inseparable from practical necessity, a testament to the complexity of survival in both the natural and social realms. Environmental challenges tested the tribe's coordination and strategic execution. Predators lurked on the edges of forests, rivers rose unpredictably, and weather shifted without warning. Each event required rapid adaptation, forcing both factions to work simultaneously in competition and cooperation. The plan's success depended on flexibility, observation, and precise alignment, qualities tested continuously by the twin pressures of nature and human emotion. Mistakes were costly, both in practical terms and in the subtle social calculus of loyalty and perception. The tension between factions became increasingly pronounced. Every successful hunt, fortification, or task completion was a victory not only for survival but for social positioning. Conversely, errors or miscalculations were interpreted as signs of weakness, disloyalty, or strategic failure. The human need for recognition and the desire to assert influence now intertwined with the practical demands of survival, demonstrating the inseparability of emotional, social, and environmental intelligence in the tribe's daily life. By late afternoon, the plan had begun to take tangible shape. Hunting parties returned with game, shelters were reinforced, and resources were strategically distributed. Social dynamics, though tense, were carefully managed. Lines had been maintained, alliances reinforced, and trust cautiously tested. The tribe, though fractured, was operational, each member aware of the delicate balance between action, observation, and the management of influence. Survival, leadership, and loyalty were now inseparable in both intention and practice. Evening approached with a sense of controlled anticipation. The first phase of the plan had been implemented, revealing both strengths and vulnerabilities within the tribe. Members were exhausted, alert, and aware that the success of future efforts would depend as much on psychological insight and emotional control as on physical skill or endurance. The valley remained silent, impartial, and eternal, offering neither guidance nor reprieve. Within this indifferent landscape, the tribe's ability to navigate human emotion had become as vital as any hunting skill or survival instinct. As night approached, reflection settled over the camp. The plan had begun, alliances had solidified, and lines had been reinforced. Yet the awareness of fragility persisted. Every success was tempered by the potential for misalignment, betrayal, or jealousy. The tribe had entered a new phase of survival, one defined not solely by skill, strength, or instinct but by strategy, perception, and the careful orchestration of human emotion. The plan was both a tool for survival and a map of the heart, illuminating the pathways of trust, loyalty, and ambition that now governed life in the valley. As the days passed, the plan that had formed during the previous dawn began to show signs of strain. While tasks were being completed and alliances maintained, an undercurrent of quiet tension rippled through the tribe. The fractures that had once been visible in confrontations and drawn lines now manifested in subtler, almost imperceptible ways. Actions that seemed routine or accidental were imbued with intention, signaling loyalty, testing trust, or undermining opponents. The valley itself remained indifferent, yet the social dynamics within the camp were electric, a web of silent observation and strategic calculation. The overlooked hunter, now a subtle master of psychological strategy, began orchestrating small acts of sabotage designed to destabilize the opposing faction. These were never overt acts of aggression, rather, they were delicate, precise, and difficult to detect. A sharpened spear left slightly dull, a food cache misplaced, or a misdirected instruction could all serve to test vigilance and create doubt. Every minor disruption was calculated to provoke suspicion, reveal weaknesses, and shift perception of competence, loyalty, and influence. The targeted faction, initially unaware of the subtle manipulations, began to notice small inconsistencies and mistakes. Trust, already fragile, started to erode under the weight of unexplained errors. Members whispered in hushed tones, trying to reconcile these events with their understanding of competence, loyalty, and alliance. Each subtle sabotage became a psychological lever, influencing behavior, decision-making, and factional cohesion. The hunter's strategy was elegant, not to provoke open conflict, but to plant seeds of doubt that would grow steadily over time. Women in both factions played critical roles in this emergent drama. Some became unwitting participants, passing on misinformation or facilitating the placement of tools and resources. Others, keenly aware of the subtleties at play, acted as observers, interpreters, and silent enforcers. Every action in daily life, from distributing water to tending children, from arranging sleeping spaces to managing firewood, carried multiple layers of significance. Simple gestures could reinforce loyalty, expose disloyalty, or subtly influence alignment. The camp had become a stage for psychological maneuvering as much as practical survival. Children, sensitive to adult behavior, mirrored these dynamics in their own ways. Playful mimicry became a method of observation, imitation, and experimentation with social alignment. Those attuned to subtle sabotage learned early that small errors or deviations could have consequences in both play and social integration. The lessons absorbed in these interactions would carry forward, embedding a nuanced understanding of trust, strategy, and human emotion into the next generation of the tribe. The natural environment continued its indifferent rhythm. Rivers flowed, trees swayed, and predators roamed. Yet the tribe's perception of the world was now mediated by human dynamics rather than pure instinct. Every environmental challenge, crossing a stream, foraging for roots, tracking game, was interpreted through the lens of trust and alignment. A fallen branch or displaced rock could spark suspicion. Even small mishaps in navigation or hunting became opportunities to reinforce factional influence or undermine opponents, demonstrating how subtly human emotion now shaped the interpretation of reality. By midday, subtle sabotage had begun to influence decision-making and coordination. Hunting parties hesitated, shelters were rebuilt or rearranged, and minor tasks were repeated to compensate for perceived errors. The efficiency of the tribe suffered, but the psychological consequences were more profound. Members began to second-guess one another, and even simple acts were questioned for hidden intent. Loyalty became not just a measure of emotional alignment but a tangible factor influencing survival outcomes. The elders, though aware of the undercurrents, faced limited capacity to intervene. Their guidance, filtered through layers of suspicion and factional bias, was only partially effective. They reminded the tribe of shared survival needs and historical lessons, but the subtle acts of sabotage were difficult to detect and even harder to address without risking further division. This demonstrated the limitations of authority in a socially fractured environment and highlighted the delicate interplay between wisdom, perception, and human ambition. As evening approached, the consequences of subtle sabotage became more visible. Food caches were slightly diminished, hunting strategies faltered, and shelter repairs were less coordinated than before. Though no overt confrontation had occurred, the psychological impact was significant. Members of the affected faction experienced frustration, anxiety, and growing distrust, while the orchestrating faction gained subtle control over perception, confidence, and influence. The valley remained impassive, yet the human stakes had never been higher. Small acts of sabotage extended beyond material manipulation. Misleading gestures, strategic delays, or intentional miscommunication further amplified tension. Every interaction carried the weight of potential consequence. Social bonds were strained as suspicion grew, and the mental energy required to navigate these subtleties was exhausting. Members had to balance physical survival, emotional regulation, and strategic awareness simultaneously, demonstrating the complexity of life in a divided tribe. By late afternoon, the first signs of emotional strain were apparent. Arguments over minor mistakes began to emerge, sometimes dismissed as coincidence, sometimes interpreted as deliberate undermining. The psychological pressure created by subtle sabotage was cumulative. Even those who were normally calm, skilled, or influential found themselves reacting with heightened vigilance and defensive behavior. Trust, once assumed, was now earned cautiously, constantly tested through observation and subtly manipulated through strategy. The subtle sabotage also influenced physical activity. Hunting required precise coordination. Misaligned perception of competence or reliability could lead to errors in tracking, capturing, or preparing food. Shelter maintenance and fire preparation were affected by hesitation, second-guessing, or strategic non-compliance. Small disruptions were magnified in their consequences, linking psychological manipulation to tangible outcomes in survival and resource management. The interplay between emotion and practical action was now undeniable. Night approached, and the camp was heavy with tension. Members were exhausted, not only from labor and survival tasks but also from constant vigilance. The mental load imposed by subtle sabotage weighed on every interaction, amplifying mistrust, envy, and factional tension. Alliances, while outwardly maintained, were psychologically strained, and every act, whether feeding a child, distributing water, or arranging firewood, was filtered through suspicion and strategic calculation. Sleep offered no respite. Dreams and awareness carried the echoes of manipulation and misalignment. The overlooked hunter, observing the effects of his strategy, reflected on the subtle power of human emotion. Jealousy, envy, and suspicion were as potent as any weapon or tool. By carefully orchestrating small acts of sabotage, he had shifted the balance of influence, creating leverage without provoking open conflict. The camp, outwardly functioning, had become a psychological battlefield where perception, loyalty, and subtle action determined outcomes as much as skill, strength, or instinct. By nightfall, the stage was set for further escalation. The effects of subtle sabotage had reinforced factional alignment, deepened mistrust, and demonstrated the latent power of human emotion. The tribe was now caught in a cycle where practical survival and psychological strategy were inseparable. Even as fires burned and stars reflected above the valley, the silent tension of subtle sabotage shaped every heartbeat, every glance, and every decision. The tribe's path forward depended on awareness, strategy, and emotional intelligence as much as survival skill. Subtle sabotage had illuminated both vulnerability and opportunity, demonstrating that jealousy and envy, when skillfully directed, could shape behavior, perception, and outcomes. The valley remained indifferent, eternal, and observing, yet within its bounds, the human heart and mind had become the most formidable terrain of all. As the days wore on, the subtle sabotage that had begun quietly now transformed into overt signs of tension, signaling the escalation of conflict within the tribe. What was once nuanced manipulation became visible in gestures, arguments, and overt demonstrations of influence. The fractures that had been carefully drawn were now gaping, shaping interactions, decision-making, and the very rhythm of daily life. Survival and social alignment had become inseparable, and every action carried the weight of both practical necessity and strategic calculation. Hunting parties, once cooperative, now found themselves divided along factional lines. Coordination faltered as mistrust grew, subtle disagreements evolved into heated debates, and minor missteps were interpreted as deliberate challenges. The valley, timeless and impartial, bore witness to these tensions, indifferent to whether the tribe would succeed or falter. Yet the human consequences were immediate: fatigue, anxiety, and frustration layered upon the physical demands of survival, intensifying the emotional landscape of the tribe. The overlooked hunter, emboldened by the growing unrest, began leveraging these divisions to consolidate power. He orchestrated subtle provocations, encouraging dissent in critical moments, highlighting mistakes, and amplifying perceived slights, to destabilize the opposing faction. Every action was calculated to shift perception, sow doubt, and reinforce loyalty within his own faction. Influence had become both weapon and shield, and mastery of human emotion had become as vital as any skill with spear or fire. The established leader, recognizing the threat, countered with his own strategic maneuvers. Public displays of competence, deliberate allocation of resources, and reinforcement of loyal alliances served to maintain cohesion while counteracting growing envy. Authority was no longer assumed, it had to be continually asserted through action, presence, and the careful management of perception. The social battlefield was now fully active, each member of the tribe aware of the stakes in both survival and influence. Women, navigating dual roles as nurturers and strategists, became critical mediators and influencers. Some maintained fragile neutrality, carefully observing behavior and subtly guiding interactions to prevent escalation from turning into open violence. Others aligned fully with one faction, using daily tasks, communication, and social influence to reinforce loyalty, test obedience, and subtly undermine rivals. Their actions highlighted the complexity of survival, the delicate balance of emotional, social, and practical demands in a high-stakes environment. Children absorbed the heightened tension with acute awareness. Games became arenas for testing alliances, observing power dynamics, and experimenting with subtle manipulations. Lessons in strategy, trust, and alignment were embedded early, reflecting the adult world in miniature. Even in their innocence, the next generation of the tribe was learning the intricate choreography of social conflict, understanding that jealousy, envy, and loyalty were forces as tangible as hunger, fatigue, or threat from predators. The natural environment, indifferent yet omnipresent, continued its patterns. Rivers flowed unpredictably, storms brewed on the horizon, and predators remained vigilant. Yet the tribe's perception of risk was increasingly filtered through social tension rather than pure environmental necessity. Every misstep in navigation, tracking, or resource management was interpreted through the lens of suspicion and alignment. The consequences of social fracture became tangible. Failed hunts, wasted energy, and inefficiency were amplified by emotional tension and strategic manipulation. By midday, the first overt confrontations appeared. Arguments over hunting strategy, food allocation, and shelter construction were no longer subtle. They were pointed, deliberate, and emotionally charged. Voices rose, gestures sharpened, and tensions spilled into previously neutral tasks. Every action became an opportunity to assert dominance, question loyalty, or reinforce alignment. The tribe was caught in a cycle where practical needs and psychological strategy collided continuously, leaving little room for error. Subtle provocations escalated quickly. A misaligned action in hunting or gathering could spark a verbal confrontation. A dispute over shelter maintenance could become a test of loyalty. The tribe's internal cohesion was tested with every decision, and even minor errors had consequences that rippled across factions. Emotional energy surged alongside physical effort, and the boundaries between survival and social competition blurred. The valley remained an indifferent witness, yet its timeless presence contrasted sharply with the intensity of human emotion. The elders, observing the escalation, attempted to mediate, emphasizing the importance of cooperation and shared history. Yet their authority was increasingly challenged, filtered through factional lenses. Words intended to calm or guide were interpreted strategically, sometimes as criticism, sometimes as implicit support. The elders' interventions demonstrated the limits of wisdom in a fractured social environment. Neutrality became a liability, and guidance required both tact and perception of subtle emotional currents. By afternoon, hunting efficiency had begun to decline. Coordination faltered as factions argued over methods, leadership, and perceived fairness. Resources once distributed according to necessity were now mediated by alliance and influence. The cost of escalating conflict became evident, energy was wasted, risk increased, and survival itself became intertwined with the psychological dynamics of jealousy, envy, and power. The tribe's daily routines were now defined as much by social maneuvering as by physical necessity. Small provocations continued to accumulate. A glance, a gesture, a misdirected tool, or a slightly delayed response could provoke suspicion or intensify rivalry. The psychological burden of constant vigilance strained relationships and amplified minor disagreements into high-stakes moments. Members had to negotiate trust, competence, and alignment continuously, requiring an unprecedented blend of emotional intelligence, practical skill, and strategic foresight. Survival was no longer merely instinctual, it was cerebral, delicate, and emotionally taxing. By late afternoon, the social battlefield had hardened. Alliances were visible, loyalties tested, and rivalries sharpened. Every interaction was laden with consequence. Sitting arrangements, resource sharing, and even physical proximity became strategic decisions. The tribe had evolved into a network of interdependent factions where success and survival required careful calibration of action, perception, and influence. Jealousy and envy had matured from internal emotion to operational force, reshaping the very fabric of daily life. The tension was now mirrored in the physical environment. The once calm valley seemed charged, each sound amplified by alert senses, each shadow interpreted as potential threat. Even mundane tasks were conducted with heightened awareness. Crossing a stream, carrying firewood, or transporting game became exercises in both efficiency and loyalty verification. Environmental demands and social strategy were inseparable, demonstrating the intricate ways in which human emotion could dictate action, survival, and hierarchy. As evening descended, the consequences of escalating conflict became fully apparent. Exhaustion, frustration, and mistrust pervaded the camp. The factions were entrenched, and minor disputes threatened to erupt into open confrontation. Subtle sabotage, psychological manipulation, and strategic action had transformed the tribe from a cohesive survival unit into a delicate balance of competing interests. The valley remained indifferent, yet the stakes within were existential, a reminder that human emotion could rival any natural threat in shaping destiny. Nightfall brought both reflection and anticipation. Fires burned unevenly, conversations were cautious, and movements were calculated. The escalating conflict had redefined life within the tribe, demonstrating that jealousy and envy were forces capable of reshaping social structure, survival strategy, and daily behavior. The tribe was now engaged in a high-stakes interplay of skill, perception, and human emotion, where every heartbeat, glance, and word could influence outcomes in ways as profound as any external danger. The stage was set for the inevitable climax. Factions were entrenched, loyalties defined, and the psychological landscape of the tribe had become as critical as the physical one. Survival would now depend on a combination of strategic insight, emotional intelligence, and adaptability. The valley, eternal and impartial, bore witness to this human drama, a testament to the enduring, complex, and sometimes destructive power of jealousy, envy, and ambition. As night descended on the valley, the accumulated tension within the tribe reached a critical threshold. Days of subtle sabotage, factional rivalry, and escalating conflict had set the stage for an inevitable eruption. What had begun as envy and jealousy had metastasized into pervasive mistrust, undermining every cooperative endeavor the tribe had once relied upon for survival. The air itself seemed heavier, thick with anticipation, as if the valley held its breath, observing the fragile human web teetering on the edge of collapse. The overlooked hunter, whose influence had grown steadily over the preceding days, recognized that the moment had arrived to solidify his faction's dominance. He did not act with brute force but with precision and psychological insight. Every glance, word, and gesture was calibrated to provoke, test, and manipulate. The objective was clear: weaken the rival faction decisively, erode confidence in the established leader, and consolidate authority, without jeopardizing the tribe's survival entirely. This was the delicate art of power in a fractured society. The opposing faction, aware of the rising tension but uncertain of the instigator's intent, responded defensively. Distrust had reached near absolute levels, with members questioning motives behind even the most mundane actions. Disputes over resource allocation, hunting routes, and shelter maintenance erupted with sharp intensity. Arguments that would have previously ended in compromise now escalated, fueled by suspicion and fear of betrayal. The valley, ever impartial, observed silently as human emotion approached its breaking point. Women, often the unseen strategists and mediators, became critical actors in this heightened state. Some worked covertly to diffuse emerging conflicts, subtly steering actions and words to prevent complete collapse. Others aligned decisively with one faction, amplifying tensions through strategic gestures, withholding resources, or influencing perceptions. Their actions demonstrated both the power and the vulnerability inherent in roles traditionally considered secondary. The survival of the tribe now depended on their emotional intelligence and strategic insight as much as on any physical skill. Children, sensing the intensifying stakes, mirrored the adult conflict in their play and behavior. Games became arenas for testing loyalty, alliances, and strategy. Innocent acts were observed, interpreted, and incorporated into the broader social calculus. Lessons in power, deception, and alliance were absorbed unconsciously, shaping a generation that would understand, perhaps better than their elders, the intricate interplay of jealousy, influence, and survival. The natural environment, indifferent to human drama, continued its cycles. Winds shifted, shadows lengthened, and nocturnal predators moved unseen through the valley. Yet the tribe's focus was inward, preoccupied with social survival. The tension amplified perceptions of risk. A misstep in movement, a misinterpreted glance, or a delayed action was magnified into evidence of betrayal. The external world, once the primary source of danger, now receded behind the internal battlefield of emotion, ambition, and envy. By mid-evening, the first overt acts of confrontation occurred. Accusations flew across the campfire, gestures sharpened into threats, and the once subtle sabotage transformed into clear, unmistakable acts designed to provoke a response. Hunting tools were misplaced deliberately, food allocations challenged openly, and alliances tested through direct engagement. The tribe's cohesion, fragile at best, began to unravel in real time, with each member acutely aware that a single miscalculation could ignite irreversible conflict. The overlooked hunters faction moved with coordination, exploiting the cracks in the opposing group's unity. Every success, whether in securing resources or asserting social dominance, reinforced loyalty and emboldened members. Conversely, each error, hesitation, or moment of indecision within the rival faction was magnified, destabilizing confidence and accelerating the descent toward confrontation. The psychological stakes had become as critical as the physical ones. Survival depended as much on perception, manipulation, and allegiance as on hunting or shelter building. The established leader, confronted with open challenge, attempted to reassert authority. Public demonstrations of competence, reminders of shared history, and displays of skill in survival tasks were employed strategically to maintain cohesion and deter further insubordination. Yet these efforts were met with skepticism and resistance. Jealousy and envy, long simmering beneath the surface, now erupted with visible intensity, undermining the capacity for reasoned response. Leadership itself became a contested arena, where perception, emotional intelligence, and timing determined influence. Subtle sabotage evolved into direct confrontation. Tasks previously executed with cooperation were now arenas for challenge. Disputes over hunting technique, fire maintenance, and resource distribution became charged with accusation and assertion. Every action was analyzed for intent, and every misstep was exploited strategically. The camp, once a unified organism, now functioned as multiple overlapping centers of influence, each asserting control while undermining rivals. Survival and social dominance were inextricably linked in a high-stakes psychological battlefield. By late evening, fatigue and emotional strain amplified the volatility of the tribe. Exhaustion reduced patience, and heightened emotion increased the likelihood of rash decisions. Arguments escalated into physical altercations, brief clashes of authority and overt demonstrations of power. Members were forced to navigate simultaneously the demands of survival, the risks of environmental threats, and the dangers posed by internal conflict. The human mind, under pressure from both necessity and emotion, became a critical instrument in determining immediate outcomes. The elders, aware that the tribe teetered on collapse, intervened with urgent guidance. They invoked memories of past crises, the shared need for cooperation, and the lessons of survival. Yet even their words, though respected, were filtered through the lens of factional alignment. In this charged environment, neutrality was nearly impossible. Every counsel, warning, or suggestion was interpreted strategically, shaping decisions and behavior according to perceived allegiance. The wisdom of experience collided with the raw force of jealousy and ambition. As night deepened, the breaking point was fully realized. Open conflict, both verbal and physical, erupted in multiple areas of the camp. The subtle psychological maneuvers that had defined earlier days transformed into direct assertions of influence and dominance. Factional lines, once drawn with precision, became battlefronts in a complex struggle for survival, trust, and control. The valley's indifferent darkness framed the human drama, highlighting both the fragility and resilience of social cohesion under strain. In the midst of chaos, the overlooked hunter and his closest allies navigated the conflict with clarity and precision. Their understanding of social psychology, combined with acute awareness of environmental demands, allowed them to exploit weaknesses and maintain cohesion within their faction. Every victory, in negotiation, coordination, or resource control, reinforced confidence, authority, and strategic advantage. Conversely, failures by the opposing faction magnified mistrust, fear, and internal friction, accelerating the breakdown of collective functionality. By midnight, the consequences of the breaking point were apparent. The tribe's unity was fractured, alliances were solidified yet polarized, and the capacity for cooperative survival was strained. Emotional tension, envy, and jealousy had become operational forces, shaping both behavior and outcomes in tangible ways. The valley, eternal and impartial, remained unchanged, yet within its bounds, human drama had reached a critical, almost catastrophic intensity. The aftermath of the breaking point left the tribe at a crossroads. Relationships were strained, loyalties clarified, and the social landscape irrevocably altered. Survival now required navigating a delicate balance of emotion, strategy, and practical skill. The eruption of conflict, fueled by jealousy and envy, had revealed both the destructive and transformative power of human emotion, demonstrating how deeply internal dynamics could shape the fate of a community. The night, heavy with tension, provided no resolution. Fires burned unevenly, tasks remained incomplete, and the psychological weight of conflict persisted. Yet within this turmoil, lessons were being embedded. Awareness, strategic thinking, and emotional intelligence had become as vital to survival as hunting, shelter, or fire. The breaking point was both destructive and instructive, a defining moment in the tribe's history, where jealousy, envy, and human ambition had irrevocably reshaped the social and practical order. As dawn approached, the tribe faced the consequences of the night's upheaval. The fracture lines were clear, alliances reinforced, and the necessity of strategic action fully realized. Survival required careful navigation of the social terrain alongside environmental challenges. The breaking point had arrived, and with it, the understanding that jealousy was no longer merely an emotion. It was a force capable of destroying or reshaping an entire community. The first light of dawn cast a pale glow across the fractured valley, revealing the aftermath of the conflict that had consumed the tribe. Fires smoldered unevenly, scattered tools lay forgotten, and the once cohesive rhythms of daily life were shattered. In the wake of jealousy, envy, and ambition, the social fabric of the tribe had been irrevocably altered. What remained was a community marked by both survival and profound loss, its members navigating the delicate balance between necessity, emotion, and the lessons learned from the breaking point. The overlooked hunter, now firmly established as a central figure, surveyed the tribe with a mixture of satisfaction and solemnity. His faction had achieved influence and cohesion, but at the cost of trust with the opposing group. Authority had been consolidated, yet the victory was tempered by the awareness that the valley's challenges remained unchanged. Predators, weather, and scarcity continued to demand skill, cooperation, and vigilance. Social triumph, it seemed, came with the realization that jealousy and envy had reshaped the rules of engagement, defining new hierarchies and expectations. The opposing faction, diminished in cohesion and confidence, faced a sobering reckoning. Confidence had been undermined, alliances questioned, and mistakes magnified. Yet within this defeat was also opportunity. Reflection, observation, and recalibration offered a path forward. Members recognized that survival depended not only on skill but also on emotional intelligence, strategic foresight, and the ability to navigate human complexity. The valley, impartial and eternal, demanded adaptation as relentlessly as it had demanded survival in days past. Women, often the silent strategists, continued to influence the tribe's path forward. Their roles in mediating, observing, and facilitating trust became increasingly critical in rebuilding cohesion. They managed resources, guided interactions, and reinforced new social norms, demonstrating how emotional insight and strategic action could restore balance even in the wake of profound disruption. Their influence illustrated the subtle yet powerful ways in which community and survival intersected with human psychology. Children, whose play had mirrored adult tensions, now observed the consequences of escalation firsthand. Lessons learned through games, mimicry, and observation were reinforced by reality. They witnessed the impact of jealousy, envy, and ambition on survival, understanding that emotional intelligence, trust, and strategic alignment were as critical as physical skill or instinct. The next generation of the tribe was being shaped by both the triumphs and failures of those who came before, absorbing knowledge that would influence behavior, alliances, and decision-making for years to come. The valley itself remained indifferent, yet its presence offered perspective. Streams flowed, winds shifted, and predators roamed as they always had, unconcerned with the triumphs or failures of human endeavor. This constancy provided a backdrop for reflection, highlighting the fleeting yet profound impact of emotion and social strategy on survival. The contrast between eternal nature and transient human conflict underscored the philosophical dimension of the tribe's experience. Jealousy could destroy, yet it could also illuminate pathways for understanding, adaptation, and growth. By mid-morning, the tribe had begun to re-establish routines. Hunting parties coordinated with cautious precision, shelters were repaired, and food distribution resumed under careful observation. Yet the pace was tempered by vigilance, reflection, and the memory of recent upheaval. Every decision was filtered through the lens of past mistakes, alliances were reassessed, and trust was granted cautiously. The valley's challenges persisted, but the tribe's awareness of human dynamics had become as vital as awareness of environmental hazards. The elders, observing the new social landscape, emphasized reflection, adaptation, and learning. They reminded the tribe that survival depended on integrating practical skill with emotional insight, that jealousy and envy, while potentially destructive, could also serve as catalysts for growth, awareness, and understanding. Their guidance reinforced the philosophical dimension of the tribe's experience. Human emotion was a force to be respected, navigated, and, when possible, harmonized with communal need. Gradually, the initial shock of the breaking point gave way to cautious stability. Alliances were clarified, loyalties renegotiated, and the tribe began to function with a new understanding of social dynamics. The overlooked hunter maintained influence, yet the experience of conflict had tempered his actions, fostering a more deliberate and reflective approach to leadership. The opposing faction, humbled but not destroyed, adapted through observation, cooperation, and subtle recalibration. The valley had not changed, but the tribe had evolved in response to both human and environmental challenges. Reflection extended beyond practical adaptation. Members of the tribe contemplated the emotional dimensions of their experience, the corrosive power of jealousy, the subtle influence of envy, and the transformative potential of understanding human motivation. Lessons in trust, observation, strategy, and emotional intelligence became embedded in daily routines, communication, and decision-making. Survival, they realized, was as much about navigating the human heart as it was about mastering the physical world. By afternoon, the camp exhibited a fragile equilibrium. Hunting, foraging, and shelter maintenance resumed, now guided by a nuanced awareness of social dynamics. The tribe's collective experience of jealousy, conflict, and strategic maneuvering had left scars, yet it also fostered resilience. Members approached tasks with renewed caution, observation, and foresight, integrating lessons learned into practical and emotional strategies for survival. The valley, eternal and impartial, offered no reward or recognition, but its constancy provided a canvas upon which human behavior could be measured, learned from, and refined. Evening brought a contemplative mood. Fires burned steadily, conversations were quieter, and gestures were deliberate. The tribe reflected on the emotional, social, and practical lessons of the conflict, understanding that survival required more than skill or instinct. It demanded emotional intelligence, empathy, and strategic awareness. Human emotion, once a source of destruction, could now serve as a guide, illuminating paths to cooperation, alignment, and adaptation. The overlooked hunter, standing at the edge of the camp, observed the valley and his tribe. Victory, tempered by reflection, revealed the complexity of human behavior. Ambition, jealousy, and envy had driven conflict, yet awareness, observation, and strategic insight offered pathways to reconciliation and growth. Leadership, he realized, was inseparable from understanding human motivation, emotional resonance, and the delicate interplay between survival and social cohesion. As night approached, the camp settled into a tentative calm. Fires burned, shadows lengthened, and the valley remained indifferent, eternal, and watching. The tribe had survived, but the experience had reshaped its members, instilling lessons in trust, observation, strategy, and emotional intelligence that would echo through generations. Jealousy had threatened to destroy them, yet reflection and adaptation allowed survival not only of the body but of understanding, the recognition that human emotion, while powerful, could be navigated, harmonized, and integrated into the ongoing story of life in the valley. The aftermath was both sobering and illuminating. Losses, missteps, and fractured relationships were tangible, yet the potential for growth, awareness, and strategic adaptation offered hope. The tribe now carried with it a deeper understanding of the human heart, the dangers of envy and the necessity of balancing ambition with cooperation. The valley, eternal and indifferent, remained unchanged. Yet within its bounds, a community had learned, evolved, and survived the profound consequences of jealousy. By the end of the day, reflection became the guiding principle. Daily routines continued, but they were now imbued with the awareness that human emotion could shape outcomes as decisively as any predator, river, or storm. Jealousy, envy, ambition, forces once seen as destructive, were recognized as elements to observe, navigate, and, when possible, harmonize with communal life. The tribe had endured not merely by skill but by learning to see the intricate connections between human behavior, survival, and the eternal rhythm of the valley.